Chapter 21 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21. It was a wonderful drive. Beppo, who acted as chauffeur, was skilful and daring. The unkind would have called him reckless. He took the old, almost worn-out motor car where most drivers would have feared to venture. But Lilly physically was very brave, and once or twice, when the Marchese uttered a word of remonstrance, she was surprised and a little amused. She was still absorbed in what had happened, and in going over and over again every word of her strange talk with the woman who now sat, absolutely silent, by Beppo Polder's side. Certain passages of the conversation remained far more vividly in Lily's mind than others. Thus, while she hardly gave a thought to the question to which the Marchesa attached such tremendous importance, the question of how Aunt Cosy procured the money which she now and again sent or gave to her son, the English girl kept thinking of what the other woman had said about her, Lilly Fairfield, and Beppo. She felt a good deal disturbed, and at the same time thrilled and moved. Was Beppo really in love with her? Certainly his manner was very, very different when they two, by chance, found themselves alone, even for a few moments. He then either became at once ardent and deferential, or coaxing, affectionate, and delightfully confidential. This last had been his attitude during the drive he had taken her the day before yesterday, and it was the mood in which she liked him best. When he gazed with burning eyes into her face, the while paying her outrageous compliments, she felt shy and very ill at ease. At such moments he seemed to be trying an experiment, that is, to rouse in her a feeling her whole being denied him the right to exact. And yet, she did find him an exciting and stimulating companion, and she could not help being glad he was staying on in Monte Carlo. All at once the motor began to slow down. They were going over the yellow marshy piece of rough road where they had stopped during the first drive Lilly had taken with Beppo and his friends. The Marchese exclaimed in his careful English, "It is a spring under the earth, never dry here." Once they were safely across the marshy place, Beppo began driving along what was little more than a path cut through a big olive grove, which brought them, far sooner than Lilly expected, to the door of La Solitude. "There is no short-cut around here that I do not know," the young man said, as he helped her down, and almost at the same moment the Marchesa called out, "I cannot do myself the pleasure of coming in to see the Countess, for a friend is coming to tea. Will you return to dinner tonight, and then accompany us to the club, Lilly? I've promised to dine with Monsieur Popeau, but I believe," she hesitated, "that he is going to take me into the club. Then we shall meet once again. So, I am glad." To Lily's relief, Aunt Cosy made no objection at all to her spending the evening with Monsieur Popeau and Captain Stewart. In fact, she seemed pleased rather than otherwise that the girl should be going to do what must yet seem to continental ideas a very unconventional thing. But perhaps because she now knew that her son intended to stay on for a little longer in Monte Carlo, the Countess's manner was extraordinarily effusive. She seemed excited, unlike herself. Indeed, her air of contentment, almost of joy, was in curious contrast to Christina's overcast countenance. The old woman looked nervous, unhappy, and ill at ease, and when fastening up Lily's pretty evening frock, she gave a long, convulsive sigh. "Is anything the matter, Christina?" "No, mademoiselle, there is nothing more the matter than there has been for a very long time," was the cryptic answer. At 7:45 Monsieur Popeau called for Lilly, and during the rapid drive down into Monte Carlo he observed suddenly, "The Countess does not look like herself tonight. I wonder what has happened to so excite and please her. Have you any idea of the reason?" He asked the question in a very peculiar tone, and Lily, surprised, answered, "Beppo is staying on in Monte Carlo. He may even come to La Solitude for a few days. That is quite enough to account for Aunt Cosy's good humour." "Are the Pescabaldis leaving tomorrow?" "Yes, and it's because Beppo can't get the room he wants at the Hidalgo Hotel that he is thinking of honouring his mother by paying us a short visit." Lily could not help a sarcastic inflection coming into her voice. She liked Beppo very much, but she had no sympathy with his love of luxury, and of having everything just so about him. After all, what was good enough for his father and mother, to say nothing of herself, ought to be good enough for him. "So, said Monsieur Popeau thoughtfully. "The young Count is not going away?" Lily looked around quickly. Monsieur Popeau spoke in a singular, preoccupied tone. "I had occasion today to look through the private telegrams which have arrived at the Monte Carlo in the last 12 hours. He hesitated, then added slowly, significantly, "And I saw a telegram which I believe contained news which more than accounts for the Countess being so joyous tonight." "Really?" said Lily uncomfortably. "How very strange." Somehow it shocked her very much that Monsieur Popeau should have the right to look at private telegrams sent to the post office. It seemed to her a very improper thing to happen. No doubt the telegram concerned the Countess's mysterious money matters, those money matters concerning which the Marchesa Pescabaldi had shown such intense interest and curiosity. "Do you know anything of such a telegram?" asked the Frenchman. He asked the unexpected question very gravely, and as Lily shook her head, a look of relief came over his face. "I am glad of that," he said. "Somehow I did not believe that you had seen the telegram I have in mind, but I regard it as almost certain that the Countess will show it you either tonight or tomorrow morning." Lily was rather taken aback by these mysterious words, but she regarded Monsieur Popeau as being rather fond of saying mysterious things and of making mysterious allusions, so she remained silent. And soon she was far too much absorbed in the amusing, brilliant scene in which she found herself at once a spectator and an actress to give any thought to what he had said. The old casino, as habitués of Monte Carlo have fallen into the way of calling it, has now been given over for some years to the ordinary tourist. Not so the so-called sporting club. To the club any man can obtain admission who can prove that he is a member of a reputable club in whatever may be his own country. Lily was astonished to see the grandiose way in which everything was conducted there. All the diners in the restaurant of the club wore evening dress, and the great rooms had a palatial splendour about them, while the decorations were in very much better taste than those of the rooms at the casino. They had found Captain Stewart waiting for them, and after they had finished dinner the three went off and looked on at the already high play going on at the tables. The club was far more Lily's original idea of a famous gambling resort than had been the casino. The people about her looked, too, of a different class from those she had seen in the other place. After they had strolled about from table to table, Monsieur Popeau now and again risking a sovereign or two, Lily saw Beppo Polder and the Marchesa Pescabaldi coming slowly towards her. When the necessary introductions had been made, the Marchesa began to talk eagerly to the Frenchman, whom she at once remembered having met before the war. Angus Stewart, with something like a scowl on his face, moved away from the two couples, but he was still near enough to hear Beppo Polder murmur, "I have never seen you in evening dress before, Lily. How lovely you look." "What a cad the man must be to say such a thing!" Angus Stewart almost said the words aloud. Lily laughed nervously. "I have never known anyone pay so many compliments as you do, Beppo. If any of my old friends heard the things you sometimes say, they would think you were making fun of me." "They would be fools. You do look beautiful tonight, so beautiful that I am not going to risk my luck at the tables. I should be sure to win, and if I won, I should be in despair." Of course, Lily knew that Beppo meant to imply that the gambler who is lucky at play is unlucky in love. Again she laughed nervously, but in spite of herself she felt that there was something alluring in her companion's deep voice and absorbed, ardent gaze. "I can think of many good reasons why you should not play, Beppo." She uttered the simple words coquettishly, and Angus Stewart bit his lip. This was a side of Lilly Fairfield he had not known was there, and a sudden passionate wave of anger and disgust swept over him. But instead of moving away, as he would have been wise to do, he moved just a little nearer to the tall, distinguished-looking foreigner and the fair, flushed English girl, whose delicate beauty was certainly set off to great advantage by her pale grey gown and quaint-looking evening cloak. The young Scotsman heard Beppo Polder say in a very low voice, "You know that from tomorrow I stay at La Solitude." "I am glad of that," Lily said, smiling. "Is that really true? Your words make me so happy. Happier than you know, Lily." Beppo was gazing down eagerly into her face, and Angus Stewart felt a wild impulse come over him. If only he could knock the fellow down. "I'm glad you're coming to La Solitude, because I know it will please Aunt Cosy. You know that I have always thought it unkind of you to have gone to the Hidalgo Hotel when she was expecting you to stay with her." And this time Lily spoke quite seriously. "If I had known who would be at La Solitude, I should have come there straight," Beppo answered, and Angus Stewart again felt that hot, unreasonable rush of rage possess him. How dare this fellow talk in that intimate way to a girl of whom he had seen very much less than he, Stewart, had done? And why did Lily seem to enjoy those boldly turned compliments? Captain Stewart told himself bitterly that women were all alike, also that he had made a mistake, that Lily was not the kind of a girl he had taken her to be. What would have been more easy than for her to snub Count Beppo? He remembered how she had snubbed dear old Hercule Popeau on their long journey from Paris, when the Frenchman, presuming on his age, had been perhaps a thought too familiar in his manner. And yet she allowed this bold brute, to say what he liked to her. "When I am at La Solitude," went on Beppo in a low tone, "I shall be a good boy, and never come down to Monte Carlo. We will go up each morning to the golf club and have a round. In the afternoons I will take you drives among the mountains. I have already managed to hire a two-seater for a week." Lily felt a little startled by his eager, intimate tones. Also, she had caught a glimpse of Angus Stewart's face. "I shan't be able to be idle all day long," she said hurriedly. "I have asked the English chaplain here if he can't find me something to do. I've already had a month of complete holiday, and somehow I find that idleness doesn't suit me." Beppo Polder looked extremely surprised and, yes, displeased. "What nonsense!" he exclaimed. "Oh, but it isn't nonsense." Lily was speaking very decidedly now. "There's a convalescent home for English soldiers near here, and I have already arranged to go there and help with some of the work. I'm quite looking forward to it." "Does the mamma know of this foolish plan?" asked Beppo. "No, I haven't told Aunt Cosy yet, but she and I quite understand one another." Lily looked up at him a little defiantly. "She knows that I am an English girl, and that I am used to doing what I wish, and to going about by myself." At that moment the Marchesa Pescobaldi detached herself from Monsieur Popeau and came smilingly towards them. "I fear I must leave this charming scene," she exclaimed, for we make an early start tomorrow morning, my husband and I." She bent forward, and to Lily's astonishment kissed her warmly. "Goodbye, my little friend," she said in French. "Perhaps the next time we meet in Rome. Do not forget what I said to you today. You and I are friends, whatever happens henceforth." Lily felt a sudden feeling of recoil from the beautiful woman. She wondered whether the Marchesa really had the evil eye. Feeling a little ashamed of herself, she made the curious little symbolic sign with her finger and thumb, which Monsieur Popeau had once told her was supposed to avert ill luck. Beppo bowed ceremoniously. "À demain, Lily," he said quietly, and then he escorted the Marchesa out through the mass of slowly moving people. Lily watched them threading their way among the crowd. Then she looked round and felt a little bewildered and surprised to find herself close to a table where a big duel was going on between a small group of players and the bank. Suddenly she saw that Monsieur Popeau and Angus Stewart were standing apart near one of the now closely curtained windows. They were talking earnestly, and Lily would have been very much surprised had she known what Monsieur Popeau had drawn Angus Stewart aside to say. "At the risk of offending you, I beg you to forget yourself, my friend. Believe me, she is in danger." "I am not thinking of myself," said Angus Stewart in an angry tone, "and I am trying not to think of her. If Miss Fairfield is in danger, it is her own fault. How can she allow that fellow to make love to her in that open, impudent way?" "She is a child, and though intelligent, has no knowledge of life at all," said Monsieur Popeau slowly. "Let me remind you of the truest of our French proverbs. To know all is to forgive all. I lay claim to know, I will not say everything, but a good deal that I do not feel I can say to you. I regard her as being in real danger of having her life wrecked by a number of cruel, selfish, and unscrupulous people who care for her as much as I do for that piece of paper on the floor. I refer, of course, to the Count and Countess Polder, also, incidentally, to the Marchesa Pescabaldi, who, in this affair, is proving once again that even a heartless woman may be a sublimely unselfish lover. I did my best the other day to warn Miss Fairfield. I was, as they say in England, snubbed for my pains." He laughed a little ruefully. "Seriously, Stuart, I have learnt something today which makes it quite clear to me that the Countess Polder, there is something sinister about that woman, I wish I could find out what it is, will make a tremendous effort to attach this English girl to her son. Should she succeed, I say it in all solemnity, that sweet child will soon be changed from a happy, joyous young thing into a grief-worn, miserable woman. I speak of what I know. I am an old man, and I have become attached to you." He paused, and Angus Stewart muttered something under his breath. Was it, "You're a good chap, Popo"? The Frenchman went on, speaking much more slowly than was his wont. "You have your chance today. Remember what Shakespeare says, there is a tide in the affairs of men. That tide has come to you now. Take her back to La Solitude, my friend, and speak to her on the way. It is a fine night. Why should you two not walk up there, through the scented orange groves? I always look at a woman's feet, and tonight I noticed that Miss Lily was shod in good strong shoes. I was surprised, but glad," he concluded quaintly. "But what shall I say to her?" asked the other. Monsieur Popeau looked at him shrewdly. "I do not press you to speak to her of your own feelings. That is a matter that every man must settle for himself. But I want you to put her on her guard. Beppo Polder is a charmer of women. He saw that his last words made the young Scotsman wince. "It is a great mistake when one is thinking of things as serious as is this thing, to avoid looking at the truth. Beppo Polder, I repeat, is a charmer, and unfortunately he likes and admires Miss Lilly. I go further. I say that she is Beppo Polder's ideal of what a man's wife should be. But does that mean that he would be kind or faithful to her after the first few weeks of married life? If temptation came his way?" He paused, then answered his own question. "No, of course he would not be. He would always respect her, no doubt, but respect does not satisfy an Englishwoman as it so often does a Frenchwoman or an Italian. Married to Beppo Polder," concluded Monsieur Popeau very solemnly, "our little Lily would wither like a flower put into a hot gas oven." It was a quaint, almost grotesque simile, but somehow it impressed Angus Stuart deeply. "From tomorrow," went on Monsieur Popeau, "Beppo Polder will be living at La Solitude. They will be together all day long, and he will make love to her all day long. His mother will help and abet him in every conceivable way possible. But what am I to say to her? She will think me impertinent, and she will be right. I have no standing in this matter, Popeau. Would to heaven I had!" "In your place," said Hercule Popeau impressively, "I would sacrifice myself for her." "Heaven knows I'm willing to do that." "Are you really willing, my friend? Are you willing to put your pride in your pocket? Are you willing to tell her that you love her, and that it is because you love her, even without hope, that you are entitled to warn her against this man? Though the Scotch, as I have found out many a time during the late war, think themselves in every way superior to the English, I do not say that they are or that they are not, but that is their conviction. Still, you and she are bound by a common language. Implore her, above all, to do nothing in a hurry. Do not let Beppo Polder go back to Rome, engaged to be married to Lilly Fairfield." The matter-of-fact words made the young man feel sick with apprehension, anger, and jealousy. Why, Popeau spoke as if the matter was almost settled. "It has not occurred to you, I suppose, that Beppo Polder may be making love to her with no thought of marriage?" Angus Stuart said slowly. "I confess that was my first conviction. When I spoke to Miss Lilly a few days ago, I thought Beppo Polder was simply amusing himself, nothing more. But I have a very good reason for having changed my mind." As he uttered these words, he walked across to where Lilly was standing watching the play, and feeling, deep in her heart, forlorn and a little depressed. "I have now to go off to see a friend on business at the Hôtel de Paris, so Captain Stuart will escort you home, mademoiselle." Monsieur Popeau spoke with a touch of rather unusual formality, and Lilly looked round at him surprised. "I am entrusting you to the care of a good and faithful friend," he went on in French. "Be kind to him tonight." Stuart was now slowly walking towards them, and his face, which had been set in grim lines, softened as his eyes rested on Lilly. The two walked out of the club in silence. She looked distractingly pretty, but also what Stuart had never seen her look before, that is, ashamed. Ashamed as a child looks, who knows she has done wrong, and yet, while longing for forgiveness, does not want to ask for it. The end of Chapter 21, read by Andy Sames. Chapter 22, of The Lonely House, by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. When they were in the open air, they both stopped, and Lilly said, almost in a whisper, How beautiful Monte Carlo is at night!" The now waning moon silvered the great white buildings and shed shafts of delicate, quivering light across the dark sea to their right. "I wonder if you'd mind our walking up to La Solitude," said Lily's companion suddenly. "Were they expecting you back early?" "No, they didn't think I could be home before 11. They made their way across the great open space in front of the casino and started walking along one of the deserted paths which led through the gardens. It was indeed a very fairyland of mysterious beauty. Through the high feathery trees could be seen the vast star-powdered sky. At last Angus Stewart began to speak, but there was something cold, almost icy, in his voice. "I know I haven't a right to interfere with anything you do, still less to criticize your behaviour, Miss Fairfield." "Why do you say that?" She felt sharply hurt and also angry. It did not look as if her companion was going to give her any opportunity of being kind. The man walking by her side was looking down into her upturned face with lowering eyes. She had not known that Angus Stewart could look at anyone as he was looking at her now. It was almost as if he hated her. Her lip quivered. She made a great effort over herself. She must not show him how pained she felt. "The truth is," he said abruptly, "I couldn't stand the way that fellow Beppo Polder behaved to you tonight. I thought him such a cad to talk as he did. Popo has found out that he hasn't at all a good reputation in Rome. He makes love to every woman he meets." While he was saying those words, the speaker was cursing himself for a fool. This was not the way he had meant to speak. He had meant to warn Lily in quiet, measured accents of the danger she was running. "Monsieur Popo is prejudiced against Beppo Polder." She spoke with a good deal of spirit, though she felt on the brink of tears. "As for his manner, a great many foreigners have that sort of manner. Look what absurd compliments Monsieur Popo used to pay me on our journey from Paris. Beppo may have a bad reputation, but the Pescabaldis are devoted to him. I've made friends with the Marchesa. She's quite a nice woman." "Is she indeed?" There was a depth of wordless scorn in the Scotsman's now steadied voice. "Why, you don't know her. You know nothing about her. You're very prejudiced too," cried Lily. "Perhaps I am prejudiced," he said curtly. "You must not be offended with me, Captain Stewart, if I say that with regard to Beppo Polder you are also very unfair." "If you think me prejudiced and unfair, that's no use my saying what I meant to say," he said coldly. "You can say anything you like to me," said Lily impulsively. "After all, where's the good of our being friends if we can't say what we like to one another?" And then, to her surprise, Angus Stewart burst out. "Of course, I know that Popo thinks I'm jealous. Frenchmen are like that. But I'm not jealous, at least I hope not. It's your true interest, and that alone, that I have at heart." "I never thought you were jealous," said Lily. Then she rather wondered at herself. She was generally a very truthful girl for saying such a thing. He turned to her. "You may not have thought so, but I'm not going to lie. And it's true that I'm very, very jealous. I'm jealous of Beppo Polder. I'm jealous of your being fond of him. But far, far stronger than my jealousy is my fear that you, Miss Fairfield—" He hesitated, and she said in a low tone, "What is it you're afraid of?" "I'm afraid that you may be cajoled into making a very unhappy marriage," he blurted out. "I don't know why you should think such a thing." Lily spoke in a hesitating, troubled voice. "It's clear to me, as clear to me as it is to Popo, who is a shrewder man than I am, that those people, the Count and Countess Polder, want you to become their son's wife." Lily remained silent. She asked herself agitatedly whether, after all, this might not be the simple truth. She could not but see that the Countess was doing everything she could to throw her and Beppo together. Captain Stewart hurried on. "The young man is a ne'er-do-well, something of an adventurer too, if Popo's information is correct." He felt surer of himself. He had feared Lily would be very angry with him, but he could see that, though deeply troubled, she was not angry. "The man leads a completely idle life. Sometimes he has plenty of money to fling about. At other times he appears desperately hard up." "The thing I do not like about Beppo," said Lily in a low voice, "is that he didn't fight. I think that's such an extraordinary thing." And then Angus Stewart did a noble thing. He might have remained silent. Instead, he said quickly, "You mustn't blame Beppo Polder for that. Even Papa admits that wasn't his fault. He wanted to go to the front, but his mother and the Marchesa Pescobaldi were determined he should run no risks, and so they pulled strings. I think ill of the fellow, and I want you to be on your guard against him, but I don't want you to think him worse than he is." They had now left the gardens and were making their way through the dark streets. Tears were rolling down Lily's cheeks. "But what can I do?" she said at last. "Surely you don't want me to leave La Solitude just because Beppo Polder is going to stay there for a few days? He's not always as silly as he was tonight. When he and I are alone together, he's quite different, and much nicer." She did not see the look that came over Angus Stewart's face as he asked himself whether, after all, his words of warning had not come, as such words are apt to come, too late. "Perhaps I'm on the wrong track. If so, forgive me. After all, Papa may be prejudiced. But oh, Miss Fairfield, don't be in a hurry. Take time to consider whether life in Italy as an Italian's wife would be really a happy life for you. I do feel that your whole future happiness may depend on what happens in the next few days." Angus Stewart was speaking very agitatedly now. He thought he saw at last into Lily's heart. He believed that after all she did care for Beppo Polder, and the bitterness which had filled his heart melted away into a great selfless pity and concern. She looked so very young, almost like a child, and even in the dim light about them he could see the tears in her eyes. "Look here," he exclaimed, "I dare say the man's not half a bad fellow. Try to forget everything I said." "I don't want to forget what you said," exclaimed Lily, and then she went on hesitatingly. "Sometimes, tonight for instance, I feel as if I almost hated Beppo, and then, when he and I are alone together, and he speaks so kindly of his people, and of dear old Christina, then I tell myself that he is nice after all." "Still," said Angus Stewart slowly, "you do enjoy his beastly compliments." Lily blushed a little and sighed. "Every girl likes having pretty things said to her. I sometimes think that Englishmen don't say enough pretty things, Captain Stewart. I can't imagine any Englishman paying his mother or old nurse the sort of compliments Beppo pays Aunt Cosy and Christina." "I wish a Scotsman could say the sort of thing you like. The sort of things Beppo Polder said tonight," he muttered ruefully. "Oh, I shouldn't like you to say such things at all." Lily smiled up into his face. They were now engaged in the lonely road leading to the heights above Monte Carlo, and they seemed alone in a moonlit, enchanted world of beauty and exquisite night scents. They walked on in silence for some moments, and then Lily just touched her companion's arm. "I am grateful to you," she whispered, "for having said what you did to me tonight, and I want to tell you that I'll follow your advice. I'll snub Beppo. I won't let him say the sort of things that you think are horrid, and which perhaps are horrid." There was a tremor in her voice, and all at once he turned on her. Why shouldn't he follow Popo's advice? Why not burn his boats? "Look here," he exclaimed. "I don't see how you can help knowing. He stopped. "Yes?" whispered Lily. "Knowing what?" "That I love you. I dare say it seems absurd, considering what a little we've seen of one another, and how very seldom I've had a chance of talking to you alone. But there it is. I suppose I fell in love with you at first sight. In fact, I know I did. And that big, grey, dirty Paris station. I've been a queer, lonely chap, a bit cantankerous too. But there it is. I've never cared for anybody else, and I don't mind how long I wait if there's the slightest chance that in the end I'll succeed. I oughtn't to speak like this now, for your people don't know anything about me." He stopped speaking for a moment. Then he began again in a slow, thoughtful voice. "I'll tell you what I'll do." Lily felt as if she must burst out laughing and crying together. She had never thought that this was the way a man proposed. "I'll write out this very night an account of myself. I'll say where I went to school, what my people were like, what I've done, and what I hope to do. And then I'll ask you to send it to your uncle. I mean to that man who's exactly like your father. Tell him I don't mind how long I wait, if only I can win you for my wife. If it's true that you're not thinking of marrying Beppo Polder, then do give me a chance." He spoke in a quick, urgent, muffled voice, and all at once he turned and took hold of her two hands. "I can't expect you to like me yet. You don't know me well enough." And then Lily suddenly said in a very low, clear voice, "I do know you well enough." She was shaking all over. It had been a terrible effort to her to say those 6 words, but somehow she felt that she ought to say them. He dropped her hands. "I say," he said earnestly, "you're not playing with me. Do you really mean that? Will you allow me to hope that in time I shall be able to persuade you to do more than like me?" He bent forward, and then, after he had heard her whispered "yes," he suddenly understood. In less than a moment his arms were round her. He was straining her to his heart, and raining kisses on her face. Then, but Lily did not know it, he did a rather fine thing. He drew back. "Forgive me," he exclaimed. "That was wrong, but a man can't always do right. And I'm quite serious, mind you, we're not to consider ourselves engaged till you've written to your uncle, till you know a little more about me, till he could not say, "till you do a little more than like me," for he knew now that she did. They walked on a little way in silence, both extraordinarily happy, yet both feeling extraordinarily shy. "I'm not a bit jealous of Beppo Polder now," he said suddenly. "But oh, darling, darling, I wish that instead of taking you up to La Solitude, I was taking you, well, anywhere else. Somehow I'm afraid of that place. I simply hate the Countess Polder." He spoke between his teeth. "Do you remember that first visit that Popo and I paid there, when she forced me to tell her all sorts of things about myself?" "I thought you managed very well," said Lily, smiling in the darkness. "I shall never forget your saying you felt as if you'd known me a lifetime." "That was quite true," he said seriously. "And, after all, there is a limit to the impudent questions one is obliged to answer truly. I saw her without her seeing me a few days ago. I suppose the day that she and Count Polder came down into Monte Carlo to meet their son, and I thought she had such an evil face, a face too full of such tremendous determination. I am certain she wants you to marry her son. Must you stay on at La Solitude?" "I fear I must." Lily hesitated. But... She did not know what to call this man who now meant all the world to her, so she called him by that little English word which may mean so much or so very little. "I promise you, dear," she said, "that I won't allow Beppo Polder to flirt with me. I am ashamed of the way I went on tonight. I oughtn't to have done it, but somehow something seemed to draw me on in spite of myself." He took her hand and held it tightly in his, and, like two happy children, they walked on, Lily in a maze of surprise and mingled feelings, in which perhaps comfort was the one which predominated. It was such a comfortable thing to feel that she had a friend as well as a lover in the strong, dependable man now walking by her side. She had felt terribly lonely sometimes. Now she would never feel alone any more. "Look here," he said suddenly, "I can absolutely depend on you to tell me everything. I gather you had a pretty bad time with that woman after you found that poor chap's body." "Yes," said Lily in a low tone. "I had a very, very bad time. She terrified me. I had never seen anyone so angry." "A funny thing of the kind happens again. Will you manage to get a message sent to me?" "Nothing of the kind is in the least likely to happen again, and don't feel worried about the other thing. I think I can manage Beppo." He winced a little at the confidence with which she said those simple words. They were now standing on the little clearing just below the gate of La Solitude. "Please don't come up to the house," she said nervously. "Let's say good-bye here." And then, for after all, though a man of honour, he was also a man of flesh and blood, Angus Stuart took Lilly Fairfield in his arms again and kissed her, kissed her, kissed her. The end of Chapter 22. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 23 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23. With her whole being in a whirl of new sensations and feelings, the happy girl made her way up slowly through the plantation of olive and orange trees. More than once she stopped walking and pressed her hands to her temples. Was it, indeed, she, Lilly Fairfield, who had just gone through that wonderful experience with a man of whom she had never heard a month ago, and yet whom she now knew would be henceforth the whole world to her? Like most girls brought up entirely with older people, there was something at once childlike and mature about Lilly Fairfield. She realized dimly that only an exceptional man, one with a very high sense of honour, would have said to her what he had said tonight. He had not tried to rush her into an immediate marriage, as almost any young man who cared for her as he seemed to care would have done. As to his having taken her in his arms and kissed her, Lily loved him all the more for that. It showed her that he was human after all. Perhaps it was the training of fastidious, old-fashioned Aunt Emmeline. Perhaps it was something in the girl's own nature. But ever since she had begun to think of such things, which was not so very long ago, Lily had always thought of a kiss between a man and a woman a sacred thing. No man had ever kissed her till Angus Stuart's lips had first trembled on her lips a few minutes ago. Oddly enough, there came to her tonight a memory of the sudden repulsion she had felt for a young man, whom otherwise she had thought a very jolly kind of boy, when he had once observed laughingly, perhaps a trifle boastingly, that he only cared to go to a dance where there was a conservatory in which he could kiss the girls. Yet it was a comfort to feel that she need not consider herself engaged to Angus. It would take a long time for her letter to reach Uncle Tom, and for his letter to reach her, and then she would be within sight of the time when she was due to leave La Solitude. Perhaps because of what Angus Stewart had said, as she drew nearer and nearer to the house, there came over her an overwhelming desire to go away as soon as possible from La Solitude. With the easy generosity of youth, she asked herself why she shouldn't simply hand over to Aunt Cosy the money which she would have had to pay had she stayed on till March. It was the £5 a week Aunt Cosy valued, not her company, though that the Countess was fond of her in a way was clear to the girl. How strange to think that a dwelling-place, which had brought her such immeasurable happiness, for had she not come to La Solitude, she would never have met the man who had just left her, yet filled her with a curious sense of foreboding and discomfort. As she emerged onto the lawn and saw, in the bright moonlight, the long, low house, there came over her just the feeling she had had this morning, a feeling of acute, unreasoning discomfort. And again with that disquieting sensation seemed to be coupled the odious personality of the old Dutchman, Mr. Vissering. Perhaps because of that silent, fleeting meeting with the woman who kept the Utrecht Hotel, she had thought of him several times that day, half fearing she might come across him. Now, tonight, the thought of him was overwhelmingly present, though she had no reason to suppose that she would ever again be brought face to face with his strange, sinister, and, yes, insolent personality. She hoped with all her heart that Beppo was in no way in his power. She walked up onto the terrace and knocked lightly on one of the drawing-room shutters, for so she had arranged to do with Christina. What seemed a long time, perhaps 5 minutes, went by, and she knocked again, a little louder this time, and then at last she heard the window within being opened, and the shutter unbarred. It was Aunt Cosy who let her in, Aunt Cosy who so very seldom sat up after 9:30. "I thought Beppo would have returned with you," said the Countess, and there were both regret and relief struggling in her voice. "I have been listening for the sound of a motor, though I did not expect you to be so soon back, dear child." Lily felt rather guilty, nervously afraid lest Aunt Cosy should cross-examine her as to how she had got home, and who had brought her back. She told herself desperately that if she was thus questioned, she would take a leaf out of Aunt Cosy's own book and say that Monsieur Popeau had brought her back. But Aunt Cosy asked no questions. Instead, she only said in a preoccupied way, "And now we will go to bed. I'll go to the kitchen and get my candlestick," Lily said. But Aunt Cosy stopped her with a peremptory, "I have your candlestick here," and sure enough, to the girl's secret surprise, she saw that there was a candlestick put ready for her on Uncle Angelo's card table. After they had made their way up the narrow, steep staircase together, Lily turned to receive Aunt Cosy's usual good-night embrace, but the Countess exclaimed, "I will come into your room for a moment, my dear." And when they were inside the door, she shut it quietly. "I have a piece of news for you," she said slowly. "It is bad news, Lily." There was a very curious look, certainly not a look of sadness, on the speaker's face. "I did not wish to spoil your pleasure this afternoon, or I should have told you then," she added. Every vestige of colour drained itself from Lily's face. "Has anything happened to Uncle Tom?" she asked in a low voice. The other shook her head quickly. "Forgive me, dear child. Of course your thoughts naturally fled to your adopted father. No, no. As far as I know, Tom Fairfield is quite well. No, the news I have to break to you came in a telegram after you had gone this morning. I felt sure you would not mind my opening the telegram." She paused. Lily stared at her. A telegram for her? But there was no one who could have anything to telegraph to her about, excepting Uncle Tom. "The telegram," went on Aunt Cosy, slowly, impressively, was to tell you that Miss Rosa Fairfield is dead." "Cousin Rosa dead?" repeated Lily mechanically. She was very much surprised, and yet Uncle Tom and Aunt Emmeline had always been expecting Miss Fairfield's death, talking about it as if it was likely to happen soon, for the old lady was much over 80. Yesterday, nay, this morning, the news would have excited and moved her, but what was Miss Rosa Fairfield's death compared with what had happened in the last hour to that great coming of love which was still absorbing her whole being? "Here is the telegram." The girl put down the candle which she had still in her hand, and opened out the piece of paper. Yes, there it was in printed characters. "Miss Rosa Fairfield died yesterday morning. You are her residuary legatee, but no necessity for you to return. Letter follows. Arnold Bowring." Lily stared down at the words. "Who is Arnold Bowring?" asked Aunt Cosy. "He is our friend, as well as Cousin Rosa's solicitor. I've known him all my life," answered Lily slowly. "You do not look particularly excited," said the Countess. "I suppose there is no doubt about your heritage. I do not quite understand the term residuary legatee. Can that mean that Miss Rosa only left you what will be left after some other person has been paid?" The words can hardly be said to have penetrated Lily's brain, so "I really don't know," she answered vaguely. "To tell you the truth, Aunt Cosy, I don't care much." There had come over her a feeling of keen regret that she had not gone to see Cousin Rosa before leaving England. There had been some talk of her doing so, but the old lady had not seemed really anxious to see her. Lily wondered if she ought to have told Angus about Miss Rosa. Somehow she was glad she had said nothing about it. There would be plenty of time to tell him when next they met, if they had nothing more entrancing, more exciting to talk about. "We will wait till this Mr. Bowring's letter comes, and we will then judge whether it is necessary or not for you to procure mourning," said the Countess thoughtfully. Lily felt a slight thrill of disgust run through her. "I'm already in mourning," she said a little coldly. "For Aunt Emmeline." "Yes, but if you've been left a fortune by this old lady, then surely you should wear all black for at least a month," observed Aunt Cosy reprovingly. "I should have thought, Lily, that your own good heart would have told you that." Poor Lily! It was with difficulty that she prevented herself from bursting out laughing. What an unconscious hypocrite Aunt Cosy was! She longed to be alone, longed intensely to be free of what she felt, to be such an alien presence as that of the woman who was still standing there before her. "Well, dear child, I will now say good night. But before I go, I should like to see you drink up your syrup. As a matter of fact, I require the glass. We are short of glasses, for I broke mine today. If you will drink up your syrup, I will take the glass away and wash it, and then I will have it for myself. I generally drink a glass of water during the night." Lily was not particularly thirsty, but she would have done anything at this moment to get rid of Aunt Cosy. So she took up the glass which Christina had left by her bedside. And then there came, in Uncle Angelo's familiar fretful voice, the words, "Cosy, Cosy!" The Countess turned quickly, and, leaving the door open, went down the passage. Lily rushed over to her tiny basin and ewer. Breathlessly she poured the syrup into the ewer. Why should she drink this rather sweet, sickly stuff if she didn't feel she wanted to do so? She felt a little bit ashamed of her sly act, but Aunt Cosy's ways induced slyness in those about her. She went to the door and held out the glass. It was taken quickly from her hand, and then Lily shut the door with considerable relief. She hesitated a moment, and then something, she could not have told you what, made her turn the key in the lock. It was the first time she had ever done this at La Solitude, or, indeed, anywhere else. She undressed. She said her prayers. She got into bed. She blew out her candle. But try as she might, she could not fall asleep. She was extraordinarily excited, at once happy and oppressed. After what seemed to her a very long time, she began to feel that strange, intangible feeling of drowsiness which heralds sleep, and it was at that moment that she realized that the curtains of her window were not drawn. It was a small matter, but it surprised her, for Christina was very exact and particular as to such things. Ought she to jump up and draw the curtains together? No, she felt too sleepy to do so. And then, instead of falling into the healthy, dreamless sleep to which she was accustomed, Lily slid off into dreamland, and in her dream she was far, far away from La Solitude and Monte Carlo. She was back at the nest at Epsom. She was telling Aunt Emmeline about Angus Stewart, and Aunt Emmeline was looking at her with a rather anxious, troubled look. At last, to her great joy and infinite relief, she heard the measured, slow, kindly, familiar tones. "From what you tell me, Lily, I think he must be a very worthy young man. Your account of him reminds me of what your Uncle Tom was like when I first met him." And then suddenly Lily woke up. For a moment she actually thought that Aunt Emmeline was here, in the room. She seemed to hear the kind, loving, rather prim words echo in her ear. She was not frightened, yet all her senses were sharply on the alert, and all at once the stillness, the intense, brooding stillness which always hung over La Solitude at night, was broken by some stealthy sounds rising from the yard which was just below her window. Lily sat up in bed and listened intently. Even now the sounds she heard were less real to her than had been Aunt Emmeline's voice in her dream. Perhaps she was still dreaming, but no, for again she heard those curious, stuffless sounds. She began to feel a little alarmed. Who could have gained access to that narrow yard below? True, there was a big gate which gave on the rough road outside, but it was a gate which, as Christina had told her, was hardly ever opened. She jumped out of bed, and going to the window, pushed it open, and leant cautiously out. As her eyes grew accustomed to the starlit atmosphere, for the moon had set, she thought she could just see that to the right the great gate was open to-night. What an amazing and extraordinary thing! She listened intently, but the stuffless sounds had ceased, so she got into bed again. After what seemed a long time, she again heard the same sounds. Perhaps some animal had wandered in from the mountain-side above. Yes, that was what it sounded like, as if some goat or donkey, finding the gate open, had wandered in hoping to find something to eat or drink. It was as if some biggish creature was dragging itself along over the uneven brick floor of the yard. There was only one door giving into the house that side, the door which led to the kitchen, and which was always kept locked. Only unlocked, indeed, when Lily herself went into the yard to the outhouse to have her bath each morning. That door led only into the yard. It was not used as a back door, as it would have been in England. Lily fell asleep again, and she could not have told you, whether it was a few moments or an hour later, that she was awakened, this time by the loud, unmistakable sound of the gate in the yard below being swung to. What an extraordinary thing! She jumped out of bed. This time she rushed to the window, and craned her head out to see in the light misty haze of earliest dawn that the gate was shut now, and that everything below looked as it always did. It must have been a human being, not an animal, which had penetrated into the yard during the night. She pulled the curtains together and fell asleep again, till she heard Christina's light step in the passage. Then it wasn't night any more, it was early morning now. Why did poor Christina get up so early? Perhaps to go to the first Mass up at the chapel. There was a priest staying near there, who had the strange habit of saying Mass at 5 o'clock. Christina often got up to attend it. Lily always knew, for the old woman looked so dreadfully tired on the days when she had done this. The end of Chapter 23. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 24 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 24. There are moments in life, not, alas, very many in number, when everything about us takes on a wonderful radiance, and when all that happens seems merged in joy. All through Lily's curious, disturbed night there had shone the golden flame of her love for Angus Stewart, and of his love for her. It was that miracle which filled the whole of her being and absorbed all her thoughts. When she got up the next morning she scarcely remembered that poor cousin Rosa was dead, and that she was now a very rich young woman. "The bath is quite ready," said Christina eagerly, "and I have already emptied some buckets of hot water in it for mademoiselle." With her hand on the key of the door which led into the little yard, Lily turned round. "Oh, Christina, something so strange happened in the night. I'm quite sure that the big gate outside here was opened, and that someone came in. I heard such curious noises on 2 separate occasions, but though I looked out of the window, it was too dark for me to see anything." The old woman looked apprehensively towards the door which gave into the house. "There are many bad characters about," she murmured. "It makes the Count nervous. Do not say anything about this to him, mademoiselle, or to the Countess. They would only be angry with me." "Angry with you?" repeated Lily, surprised. "It is possible that I left the big gate undone. The only time that gate is open is when they are bringing in the wood and the charcoal for the fire. Some was brought a day or 2 ago. I may have left the gate unlocked," she repeated in a troubled voice. The girl hurried out and ran across the yard. The outhouse had evidently been tidied up by Christina that morning. Somehow it looked different. Lily glanced round. What was it that made this queer little place look other than usual? Then all at once she knew. The curious-looking trolley, which as a rule stood just opposite the door, was now pushed back alongside the further wall. No doubt it had been used yesterday by Uncle Angelo when moving the plants he had bought 2 days ago to the garden. And then all at once it struck Lily that it must have been Uncle Angelo who left the gate unlocked. Every time that trolley was moved out from the outhouse, the gate must, of course, be unlocked to let it through. The water in the high, narrow zinc bath was still very hot, and Lily did not want to go back into the house to get a pailful of cold water. So she walked about, stamping her little feet to keep warm, for it was rather cold in this shadowed, outdoor room, where no sun ever penetrated. At last she went close up to the trolley. She could think of no better name for it, and then she noticed that the big bicycle wheels were splashed with yellow mud. And then all at once there rose before her mind that patch of yellow mud into which the Pescaboldi's motor had sunk. She recalled the Marchese's explanation that there was a spring under the ground. It was clear that the trolley must have been dragged across there very recently. "I want you and Christina to go down into the town this morning. There is something I desire you to do for me at the English Bank." Before Lily, who had just had her breakfast, could answer, the Countess went on. "I want you to get some money change for me there." The Countess went quickly out of the kitchen, and Lily heard her go upstairs into her bedroom. In a few moments she was back again, with a small work-box of old Italian workmanship. "I have here some English notes," she said, "that I want changed into French money. As you know, there is a good rate of exchange, especially if it is done through an honest banker." She paused, and then said firmly, "I want you to say that these notes were sent you from England in a registered letter." Lily flushed up, and the Countess exclaimed, "It is a very small, a very white lie." "Why should I say anything?" said Lily uncomfortably. "Of course they will think I got the money from England." "What hypocrites the English are!" The words were uttered very bitterly. "They think nothing of saying 'not at home' when they are at home, but they hesitate about a small thing like this to oblige one who loves them." Poor Lily! She felt overwhelmed with discomfort. It seemed to her that Aunt Cosy was making a fuss about nothing, and trying to make her, Lily, lie for the sake of lying. "Very well," she said at last. "If I should be asked, which I don't think likely, then I will say that I got them from England. After all, they did come from England originally." She held out her hand. She supposed Aunt Cosy was going to hand her 3 or 4 £5 notes. But the Countess drew out of the pretty box a thick wad of paper money. Lily felt much taken aback. In this wad of banknotes which the Countess was holding in her hand there must be some hundreds of pounds, that is, supposing each note was worth £5. "It is not necessary to count them," said the Countess quietly. "There are here, I have reckoned it all out, 100,000 francs, my child. That is, let me see." She waited a moment. £4,000 of English money." £4,000? repeated Lily. She was thoroughly startled. "What a tremendous lot of money, Aunt Cosy. Yet I should be sorry if I thought that Miss Rosa had only left you that tremendous amount of money," exclaimed the older woman dryly. "Each of these notes must be worth a great deal," said the girl slowly. "They are £50 notes," said the Countess quietly, "and there are here 80 of them." "The bank manager will be very much surprised," said Lily hesitatingly. Somehow she did not at all like the thought of doing this job for Aunt Cosy. "He will think it so extraordinary that I should want so much French money. Mayn't I say it is for Uncle Angelo?" "On no account do that, Lily." The Countess looked much disturbed. "The money, as a matter of fact, belongs to a friend of mine, and Beppo is going to invest it." She waited a moment. "Just now English people are sending their money to France because of the good rate of exchange. The banker will not be as surprised as you expect him to be." "I should just like to ask you one thing," said Lily timidly. "Yes, my dear, what is that?" There was something foreboding in Aunt Cosy's voice. "I've only been wondering, Aunt Cosy, whether these notes were paid through the bank where I have my account. If so, of course they will know that I cannot have received them from England." Countess Polder, not for the first time, was startled at this, as she thought, unusual display of intelligence on Lilly Fairfield's part. "You can feel quite comfortable," she said deliberately. "These notes have only just arrived in Monte Carlo by registered post, but if the slightest difficulty is made, then bring them straight back to me. Is that understood, Lily?" The girl felt relieved. "Yes, of course, Aunt Cosy." "I shall be very glad if you will start at once," went on the Countess, "for I expect Beppo and his luggage early this afternoon. He will first see his friends off, and then he will come straight here. I need hardly say that you and Christina must drive back. In fact, you had better engage a carriage as soon as you see one disengaged, and drive in it to the bank." "Why should we do that?" asked Lily. The Countess told herself that the girl was a fool after all. "Because it would be very dangerous for you to leave the bank on foot with so much money on your person. Bad characters hang about banks to see what money is drawn out. Then they snatch the bag or purse into which it has been put." "I see," said Lily slowly. She felt extremely, horribly uncomfortable at the thought of what she was going to do for Aunt Cosy. "While you are at Monte Carlo, would it not be well to send a telegram to Mr. Bowring, just to say that you have received his communication? It might be well also to instruct him to purchase a handsome wreath. After all, you owe that, dear child, to dear Cousin Rosa." Lily made no answer to that suggestion, and a few minutes later she and Christina started off for the town. The money contained in a huge envelope, which was fully addressed, as Lily noticed, to herself at La Solitude, lay at the bottom of the big market basket carried by the old waiting-woman. They had been walking for a few minutes when suddenly Lily's companion slipped and would have fallen had not the girl caught her strongly by the arm. "You ought not to have come out today, Christina," exclaimed Lily. "I saw this morning that you were really ill." "I got up too early, mademoiselle," said Christina in a dull tone. "So I am very, very tired. Still, I am glad to be with you and away from La Solitude. Surely it isn't necessary for you to go to church, especially on a weekday, so very early," said the girl impulsively. "I ought never to go into a church." Christina was speaking in an almost inaudible voice. "I am not worthy to enter the house of God. But, mademoiselle, I feel so safe there. As you know, the devil hates holy water. He cannot follow me past the porch." She spoke in such a suffering, troubled tone that Lily had not the heart to smile at her extraordinary words. In a sense she was awed and moved by the sincerity of Christina's faith, even if she, Lily, thought it a curiously superstitious faith. "I am quite sure that only angels surround you, Christina," she said, now smiling outright. "The devil is much too busy looking after his own to trouble about you." "And what if I were to tell you that I am one of his own?" said the old woman, looking round fixedly into the girl's face. And though the sun was shining and Lily's heart was full of joy, there did come over her a strange eerie feeling of fear. Christina's life in La Solitude, a life which must have been extraordinarily lonely before she, Lily, had come there, had evidently affected the poor old soul's brain. There are a good many lunatic asylums round Epsom, and among Uncle Tom's friends was a very clever doctor attached to one of these institutions. He had sometimes told the Fairfields pathetic stories of his patients and of their strange, uncanny delusions. Lily's thoughts turned instinctively to Monsieur Popeau. She must ask him what could be done to rescue Christina from a life which was evidently slowly driving her mad. There must be almshouses and homes of rest in France, as there are in England, suitable for such a case. She took Christina's hand. "Look here," she exclaimed. "It's wrong to feel like that. Really wrong." And then, as Christina shook her head, she added rather shyly, "I know you believe in the good God. Surely you do not think that He would allow evil spirits to surround you? Why, it's a terrible thought." Christina gazed at Lily with a strangely pathetic look. "Forget that I said anything," she whispered nervously. "If the Countess knew that I had said this to you, mademoiselle, well, useful as I am to her, I think she would kill me. I am terribly, terribly afraid of her." Lily's heart beat with pity and concern. It was quite clear that Christina, while fond of the Count in a way, and obviously adoring Beppo, hated her mistress. "Of course I shall say nothing to Aunt Cosy. I shouldn't think of doing such a thing." They walked on in silence, and then, suddenly, Christina began to talk in quite a cheerful voice of the food she was going to buy for that night's supper. It was clear that her mind had gone off to Beppo, and to his coming stay at La Solitude. Suddenly she asked, "Why has mademoiselle got on a black dress and a black hat? Today is a joyful day in mademoiselle's life." Lily was puzzled by these words. Christina couldn't possibly know that today, the first day of her secret engagement to Angus Stewart, was indeed marked with a white stone. She blushed and laughed. "I am happy, though I have had some sad news, Christina. News that ought to make me sad. An old cousin of mine, who was very kind to me, is dead. The news was in the telegram which came for me yesterday." "Ah," said Christina, drawing a long breath. "Mademoiselle has relieved my mind. The Countess took the telegram from the man, and I was afraid, perhaps, that Beppo was in some trouble." They were now close to the entrance of the town, and the old woman put out her small thin hand and touched the girl lightly on the arm. "You have been the good angel of La Solitude," she exclaimed. "And now it is owing to you, to your being with us, that Beppo comes to pour fresh life into 3 withered hearts." She waited a moment, then added slowly, almost reluctantly, "I should not have spoken as I did of the Countess just now. She is not entirely bad, for she is devoted to her son. This morning she told me she believed that henceforth all would be well with him." "Indeed, I hope it will," said Lily. But there came across her a slight twinge of discomfort, for poor Christina was looking at her with such a strangely adoring expression on her face. Her sensation of discomfort deepened when the old woman added, "And it is to you, that we owe everything. I always feared that Beppo would marry a haughty, ugly woman, whom he would detest, from whose hand it would be bitter to take anything. I hope he will not do that," said Lily, getting very red. "We know he will not do that. He is going to marry an angel." Lily felt a sharp thrill of annoyance and dismay shoot through her. Aunt Cosy felt so convinced that she could force her, Lily, to marry Beppo, and Beppo to marry Lily, that she had actually confided her intention to Christina. The girl hastened her footsteps. She felt embarrassed and angry, but somehow she did not believe that Beppo would lend himself to such a plot, if plot it was. Perhaps something of what she was feeling showed in her face, for several times Christina looked at her with a nervous, apprehensive look, though she said nothing. Things seldom turn out as one expects in this world. The bank manager, while professing himself quite willing to exchange the notes, yet offered her much fatherly counsel on the unwisdom of play. He apologized for what he called his impertinence, explaining that he had 2 daughters of his own, and then he proceeded to tell her 1 or 2 sad stories about English ladies who had come to Monte Carlo and risked and lost the whole of their fortunes. Lily did not know what to answer. It seemed best to obey strictly Aunt Cosy's injunctions, to listen to all he had to say, and to make no comment. When Lily came out of the bank, she suddenly made up her mind that she would drive to the convalescent home and arrange about work there. Something told her that it would be easier to persuade Aunt Cosy to let her do as she wished if the matter were settled. The place was a good deal further from La Solitude than the chaplain had given her to understand. In fact, it was in France, quite a couple of miles from Monte Carlo proper. But Lily found that she was eagerly expected by the good-natured, jolly-looking matron. It was arranged provisionally that she should go there 3 times a week, arriving about 10 in the morning. "And we shall always be pleased to give you lunch," the matron said, smiling into the girl's pretty, happy face. After they had left the convalescent home and were driving back towards Monaco, Christina suddenly exclaimed in a pleading voice, "I wonder if Mademoiselle would mind taking me for a moment to the convent of the White Sisters. It would not delay us more than 10 minutes." Lily assented, pleased that she could do something to give the old woman pleasure. In her eagerness, Christina got up in the open carriage and touched their driver. He looked round, without slackening their breakneck pace. "The convent of the White Sisters," she exclaimed, and the man nodded and whipped his horses up to go yet faster than they were going. Up the steep road leading into old Monte Carlo the little carriage rocked and swayed. They swept past the lovely garden of which Lily now had a poignant memory, and then they started going down more slowly a very narrow quiet street of high stone houses, and finally they drew up opposite a huge closed iron gate. "Here we are!" exclaimed Christina in an eager voice, a voice quite unlike her own. "My mother died when I was only 5 years old," she whispered, "and I was here a great deal, both as a child and as a young girl. Indeed, this convent was my real home." Lily was very much surprised. She had always supposed Christina to be Italian born and bred. Then she was a Monegasque, after all. A postern door opened, and Christina motioned Lily to pass through into the courtyard round which the convent was built. Everything up on the rock has to be on a small and rather confined scale, but even so it was a fine and spacious courtyard, and Lily was surprised to see that there were 4 huge blue pots exactly similar to the 2 at La Solitude. Perhaps Christina saw the surprise in the English girl's face, for she said quickly, "These were presented, as well as the geraniums growing in them, by the Count to the White Sisters. There is a close connection between the Polder family and the White Sisters." "Yes, indeed," chimed in the nun who had admitted them. "Our holy foundress was a Countess Polder." Lily could not help smiling at the image evoked. With the best will in the world it would have been impossible to associate the epithet holy with the woman she knew as Countess Polder. The 2 visitors were shown straight into a small, lofty hall, of which the window overlooked the sea and the rugged coastline towards Nice. Just below the window was a narrow terraced garden. "I will inform the Mother Superior that you are here," said the sister ceremoniously, and as soon as she had left them, Christina hurried across to the window. "It is down there," she said, pointing to a path which ran along the top terrace, "that I used to play during recreation." The door opened, and a nun dressed all in white, a commanding, almost a splendid figure, who looked to Lily's eyes as though she had stepped out of a medieval pageant, walked in. Christina curtsied, and the nun put out her hand and clasped that of the old woman. "So this is your young English friend," she said, and she fixed a pair of penetrating dark eyes on Lily's face. "I have brought her to receive your blessing," said Christina, "and I hope to bring Beppo before many days are past." She added rather nervously, "Mademoiselle is a Protestant, but that, no doubt, is a misfortune which will in time be remedied." And then there came across the old nun's face a very charming look. "An old woman's blessing can only do Mademoiselle good," she exclaimed, and then she took Lily in her arms and kissed her. The girl felt extremely moved and, yes, interested by this, to her, surprising experience. But she felt vexed and also annoyed by the reference to Beppo Polder. It was obvious that Christina meant to associate them, Beppo and herself, in the mind of the Mother Superior. "A sorrow has befallen the community," said the nun in a sad tone. "We have lost our beautiful cat. Every effort is being made to find him, but we fear he found Monaco too dull, and that he betook himself off one morning to gay Monte Carlo." The Mother Superior accompanied them across the courtyard. When they reached the postern gate, Christina burst into sudden tears. "How I wish I was going to stay here with you," she said, sobbing, but the old nun patted her on the shoulder. "Come, come, Christina, you must not be foolish. How often have I told you that it is a privilege to serve God in the world?" Christina dried her eyes, and Lily saw her make a determined, almost agonized effort to regain her usual quietude. For a time they drove along in silence, and then Lily said affectionately, "I am sure the Mother Superior would agree with what I said to you today, Christina, that God is far too good to allow any evil spirits to come near you." No doubt she would say that, answered Christina sombrely. But, like you, mademoiselle, she is not in a position to know how God treats those who neglect to keep his laws. And then Lily suddenly remembered with dismay that when making her arrangements with the matron of the convalescent home, she had forgotten all about Beppo's visit to La Solitude. Perhaps, after all, she had better start going there regularly after he had left. What had happened the night before had altered the whole of life for Lily Fairfield. Everything, excepting Angus Stewart, his love for her love for him, seemed out of focus. She felt ashamed of the interest she had felt in Beppo Polder. She had looked forward to his visit at La Solitude, but now she regarded it with indifference, mixed with a certain apprehension, an apprehension which had deepened since Christina had uttered those curious, ambiguous words to the old nun. Christina obviously hoped with all her heart that she would marry Beppo, and without any doubt the Countess hoped so too, now that she, Lily, had become residuary legatee to Cousin Rosa. But somehow she no longer felt afraid of Aunt Cosy and of Aunt Cosy's plans. Even in England people often want a marriage to come to pass, and it just doesn't. What would Lily have felt had she known that Aunt Cosy had taken from the postman that very day a bulky letter addressed to Miss Lilly Fairfield, and, further, that after having carefully perused it, she had decided that it need never be delivered to its lawful owner? The end of Chapter 24. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 25 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25. I love you, Lily. Love you passionately. Why should you be offended at my saying this? Surely you can understand that we Southerners are not like cold, calculating Englishmen. We say what is in our heart. You laughed just now when I told you that you had been my ideal woman for years, and yet, Lily, it is true. Beppo's voice was broken with what seemed to be real tears, and Lily, in spite of herself, felt moved and thrilled by his ardent words. It was the first evening of the young man's stay at La Solitude, and the two were alone in the garden. After dinner it was Lily who had suggested that they should go out of doors. She had done so quite simply, thinking that the Count and Countess would, as a matter of course, come out too. But they had both stayed in the stuffy salon, only opening one of the windows for a moment to watch with eager benign eyes the two young people go off together, alone, into the moonlight to the right, where there was a grass path which led to the confines of the little property. It was there, pacing up and down almost within earshot of the house, that Beppo, soon throwing away his cigarette, had begun pouring out ardent declarations of love. At first Lily had tried to treat what he said as a joke, or as a half-joke, but he had soon forced her to take him seriously, for he became more violent, more passionate in his utterances. Now she was just a little frightened. How would she ever get through the next few days if whenever they were alone Beppo talked and, what was far worse, acted as he was now doing? For suddenly he had seized her hands, and now he was pressing burning kisses on their upturned palms. Perhaps he realized he was frightening and offending her, for with that curious mixture of real ardour, passion, and cool, calculating intelligence, which is so marked a trait in most Southerners, he suddenly dropped her hands. "Forgive me," he cried pathetically. "I have been precipitate and selfish tonight. You are so good in allowing me to be your friend. It is well to begin with a friendship when one aspires to love." And as he had expected her to do, Lily eagerly met him halfway. "I have always hoped you would be my friend," she said sincerely. "Ever since I came here, ever since Aunt Cosy began talking about you to me. I hoped that if ever we met, we should be real friends, Beppo." "I, too, hoped it," he said earnestly. "Do you remember that drive we took only a few days ago? As we talked, I felt that my soul and your soul were one. We spoke so intimately. We said so many things that as a rule a young man and a young woman do not say to one another." "I don't quite know what you mean," said Lily uncomfortably. "Surely you remember my telling you how little I understood Papa and Mamma. Should I have said that to one I did not trust? And then you told me of your lonely childhood, Lily." His voice dropped. It became very soft and caressing and gentle. "And I felt that we were truly friends, henceforth." "Yes," she said slowly. "I enjoyed that drive very much, and it's quite true, Beppo, that I do like you very much more when you are, what shall I say, sensible, than when you talk as you did just now." "My pure angel!" he exclaimed ecstatically. "You do not know what it means to me to hear you speak like this." He added in a lower tone, "It shows me what of course I already knew, that no man has ever made love to you, my exquisite Lily. You are a fragrant flower who till now has bloomed alone." And though Beppo's words seemed to the girl walking by his side exaggerated and even absurd, he uttered them in such a serious way, and again Lily felt oddly touched. Poor Beppo! Perhaps he had never had a chance of a straightforward, happy friendship with a French or Italian girl. They were standing now at the extreme end of the grass path. From there, in the daytime, was a beautiful view of the sea, sky, and coastline towards France, and Beppo began telling her some curious stories of his ancestors, who had been almost as great people through the ages, when the Riviera belonged to Italy, as were the Grimaldis on their frowning rock. At last, at her suggestion, they turned and walked slowly back to the house. The Countess had sat up for them, and as they came into the salon she looked eagerly into Lily's face, only to see, with disappointment, that the English girl looked her usual quiet, unemotional self. After Lily had gone upstairs, Beppo lingered on a moment or two with his mother, and at last he answered the mute inquiry in her eyes. "I think I have made a good beginning," he whispered. "But, Mamma, it is no good being in a hurry with English women. They do not understand. They are frightened and made uneasy if they are what the English call rushed. But that, Mamma, is no disadvantage in the long run." "In the long run?" echoed his mother, puzzled. "A man does not wish the damsel who is to be his wife to be too forthcoming," he said, quoting an old Italian proverb. She nodded. What Beppo said was perfectly true. Lily got up long before Beppo was astir, and her heart was soon singing for joy, for she had gone to meet the postman, and had received her first love-letter. Angus Stewart had compromised with his conscience by having no beginning to his letter, but he had not been able to keep back what was now filling his heart, and to Lily it was a perfect letter. He had added a long postscript. "I had no intention of trying to see you today, but Papa Popo is determined to see Count Beppo Polder at close quarters, and so I couldn't prevent his making the proposal that we should all meet at lunch." There had also come for her an elaborate little note from Monsieur Popo, proposing that the whole party at La Solitude should meet him and Captain Stewart at the golf club and lunch there with them today. Lily could see no reason why they shouldn't all be together, and she did so long to see her lover. There was no fear that Angus would betray himself, though secretly she would have liked to tell Beppo the truth. She had felt such a hypocrite last night. Then, for the first time, it suddenly struck her as strange that Angus Stewart had not enclosed the little statement as to himself, which he had pressed her so earnestly to send to Uncle Tom. However, that was a very small matter. For her part, she had no wish he should ever send it to her. She had quite made up her mind. Even in the very unlikely event of Uncle Tom not approving, nothing he could say would make the slightest difference to her. Thrusting the letter of her lover in her bodice, and with Monsieur Popeau's note in her hand, she went slowly back to the house, just in time to see Beppo, clad in a wonderful-looking dressing-gown, going, with an air of deep disgust, into the kitchen on his way to his bath. She could hardly help laughing outright. What a very singular creature he was! What a mass of contradictions! During dinner the night before there had been mention of a hunting expedition he had taken the spring before, during which he had endured, or so he hinted, untold hardships, and yet it was clear that he found the trifling discomforts associated with life at La Solitude almost intolerable. Lilly Fairfield felt very happy as she went out into the garden to wait for the others to come down. The day had opened radiantly well for her, and she could not help putting down a little of her feeling of happiness and content to the presence of Beppo Polder. Not only the Count and Countess, but Christina also, seemed transformed. It was as if the atmosphere of the lonely house were changed, making all those in it happy, no longer gloomy, preoccupied, and anxious. When Aunt Cosy came down, Lilly handed her Monsieur Popeau's note, fully expecting that she would say, in her decided way, that she could not go to the golf club, and that she did not suppose the Count would care to join the party either. But "It will be a pleasant expedition for us all, Lilly. We have only once gone up to the golf course since it was laid out. How glad I am that Beppo had the good thought of ordering a taxi to come this morning. It would have been quite impossible for me to walk." Her satisfaction at the thought of the forthcoming expedition was apparently shared by Uncle Angelo, but Lilly at once saw that Beppo was not at all pleased. He obviously would have preferred going up to the golf club with her alone, but, still, he fell in with the plan, and he made himself very pleasant during the drive. Monsieur Popeau had ordered an excellent luncheon, and was himself in exceptionally high spirits. The only two members of the party who did not contribute much to the general conversation were Angus Stewart and Count Polder, but they were both, by nature, silent men. To Lilly's secret relief, Beppo behaved perfectly. He paid her, that is, no more attention than was due to his mother's guest, and when, after luncheon, the younger members of the party played a round in company with some English people with whom Monsieur Popeau had made friends at the Hôtel de Paris, he rather went out of his way to be attentive to a young married woman. Even so, Lilly and her lover were not able to exchange more than a very few words alone together. Still, those moments were very precious. Poor Angus Stewart! Lilly could not see into his heart, could not divine, closely as she felt in sympathy with him, how he longed to be with her, far away from all these tiresome people. All he said was, "Will you be coming down to the town? I mean alone, as you used to do, during the next 2 or 3 days?" Lilly shook her head regretfully. "I'm afraid not. But Beppo Polder isn't going to stay very long at La Solitude. He's mixed up in some big money scheme, and he will have to go back to Rome in a few days." The young man's face darkened as she mentioned Beppo, and Lilly saw the change in his face. "It's all right," she said quickly. "He's been really very nice, but I do wish you'd let me tell him." "No," he said sharply. "I beg you do not do that." And then under his breath he whispered the word "darling," adding, "You see, I don't want anyone to know till you've heard from your uncle. Oh, Lilly!" And then he muttered, Confound it! Ferociously, for the Countess was coming towards them, with a very determined look on her face. "Lily," she exclaimed, "I wish you would explain to me this strange game. I feel that you, dear child, with your clear mind, will be able to make me understand it." Angus Stuart scowled at the speaker, and she caught his look and put a black mark against him, or rather she added a black mark to the several she had already registered with regard to this disagreeable, plain young Scotsman, who apparently thought he had a chance of beating her son at the great game at which Beppo had always been an expert and a lucky player, and he, Angus Stuart, a mere tyro, the human game called love. Why, even if Lily had received and sent on that peculiar dry statement and formal covering letter which she, the Countess, had burnt in the empty grate of her bedroom yesterday, there was time enough for Lily and Beppo to be engaged and married 10 times over before an answer could have come to it from Tom Fairfield. The only perfectly happy and contented member of the whole party was Hercule Popo. He was intensely interested in what he regarded as the drama now being unfolded before his eyes. He had no doubt at all that the Count and Countess Polder intended their son to marry Lilly Fairfield. He was equally convinced that they would fail. Also, though Angus Stuart had not said anything to him, his practical refusal to discuss what he and Lily had talked about during their long night walk to La Solitude made him certain that something had been settled between the two young people. Count Beppo's attitude interested and rather puzzled him. Was the young man playing a double game? His manner to Lily was simply civil and deferential. Indeed, it was hard to believe that the Beppo Polder of to-day was the same Beppo Polder who had showered such extravagant compliments on the girl at the club 2 nights ago. The shrewd Frenchman wondered whether Lily Fairfield had confessed to an understanding with Angus Stuart, thus convincing Beppo Polder that she neither would nor could ever marry him. If so, the Count and Countess were evidently not in the secret. About an hour later, Angus Stuart and Lily were again alone for a few moments. "I don't know how I shall be able to get through the time till you've heard from your uncle," he said in a low tone. "Oh, Lily, I wonder if you know how much I love you." She was on the point of telling him that there was not the slightest necessity to write out that account of himself to which he had referred, and yet at the back of her mind there was a good deal of surprise that he had not enclosed it in his letter to her that morning. He had made such a point of it, had said so very decidedly that they must not consider themselves engaged until Uncle Tom knew something about him and approved. "I do so hate that fellow being in the same house with you," he muttered. Lily felt distressed. "He really is being quite sensible." "I did notice that he behaved decently at lunch." The words were said grudgingly. "If he hadn't, well—" He stopped abruptly, for the others were now moving towards them, and so he turned away. It was clear, Lily admitted it to herself regretfully, that there would never be any love lost between Angus Stuart and Beppo Polder. And then, perhaps because the sun was shining, because she was near her lover, because everything seemed to be going just as she wanted it to go, Lily cast a little tender thought towards Beppo Polder. She did like him, she couldn't help it, but perhaps it was just as well that henceforth their paths would lie far apart. She knew she could never make a friend of any man whom Angus really disliked. The days that followed were like a happy dream. Every morning brought Lily a letter from Angus Stuart. In the sunshine of his new-found happiness, the ice of the young Scotsman's reserve broke down, and his long letters filled her with delight. though she sometimes found it impossible to read the new one right through, till she had locked herself in her room at night, for somehow she was never alone. Beppo was her shadow, so much so that one day, to her annoyance, Christina observed with a smile, "I once read a book when I was a young girl, mademoiselle. It was called The Inseparables. You and the young count remind me of the title of that book." On the 5th morning of Beppo's visit, Lily made up her mind to go off to the convalescent home, and she actually did slip away before the young man was down. But she had only been at the home an hour when she was told that a gentleman wished to see her, and in the hall she found Beppo smiling and a little apologetic. "It is such a lonely walk," he explained, "that Mamma thought I had better come and fetch you." She made him wait a full half-hour while she finished the letters on which she was engaged, and then on the way back to La Solitude she rebuked him gently. "You know, whatever Aunt Cosy may do, that in England girls always go about by themselves. It's absurd to say that it isn't safe here. It's absolutely safe. I've never met a man, woman or child who looked as if they would harm a fly. Before you came to La Solitude, I constantly went down to Monte Carlo by myself, and more than once I came back during that strange change that takes place each afternoon, and which only seems to happen here. I mean, when it's daylight one moment and night the next." "You will have plenty of time for your good works when I've gone back to Rome," said Beppo firmly. He added, after a moment's pause, "You would not deprive me of 1 minute of your company if you knew how much it meant to me." He said these words very simply and sincerely, without garnishing them with any absurd compliments, and again Lily felt touched. What an odd, queer being this man striding along by her side on the lonely hillside was. So boyish in some of his ways, so mature in others, such a man of the world, and yet now and again so very simple. During those days of Lily's life, Monte Carlo might have been 100 miles from the Solitude. Beppo did not seem ever to want to go into the town. He was quite happy at the golf club, or taking Lily for drives in the funny, ramshackle little motor which he had hired for a week. 2 or 3 times Aunt Cosy had suggested that they should go down and have lunch or dinner in one of the big restaurants, but Beppo had refused. "If we do that," he objected, "I'm sure to come across people I know, and then my reposeful little holiday will be over." As for the Countess, she more than once said that she had never been so happy as she was just now. Once, when they were alone together, his mother asked Beppo if he really must go back to Rome just yet, and he answered very seriously, "You know, Mamma, that the money you have so kindly given me should be invested so as to bring in the very highest return. My chance of doing that is to be in Rome, with the man of whom I told you. But do not be afraid. I shall very soon come back. All is going well, if slowly." "I suppose you are wise in going slowly with Lily," said the Countess doubtfully. Beppo looked at her thoughtfully. "It is a great trial, but I have no doubt of the wisdom of my course, Mamma. Believe me, clever as you are, I know women better than you do." And she answered with a smile and a sigh, "I do not doubt that, my Beppo, and after all there is plenty of time." "Yes, Mamma, thanks to your cleverness and goodness, there is." The Countess lowered her voice. "Lily had a letter today from the lawyer. I asked her to show it to me. There is no doubt about the money. It is a fortune. 96,000 English pounds, according to what the man calls a rough estimate, but she will not receive it yet awhile." "So much the better," exclaimed Beppo. "You may laugh, Mamma, but I am really and truly mad about her. Would that I were a millionaire leading her penniless to the altar. Then I would scatter diamonds and pearls, rubies and emeralds before her feet." His mother laughed. She could not help feeling a little twinge of jealousy, but still she was becoming really fond of Lilly Fairfield. Countess Polder, like so many people, was always apt to admire what belonged to herself, and she now regarded the English girl as being practically her daughter-in-law. Even so, she noticed uneasily that Beppo was not making much way with Lilly, and now and again there would come a moment of discomfort and doubt, when she would ask herself with real uneasiness whether the girl and Angus Stewart were in correspondence. There had certainly been no harm in the rather formal, dull letters the young man had written to Lilly from Milan during the early days of their acquaintance, but Countess Polder did not consider it at all proper that a girl should be receiving letters from a member of the other sex. It seemed to her unfitting and unnecessary. Twice, while Lilly had been out with Beppo, the Countess had searched her room very thoroughly in order to discover whether there were any new letters there from Angus Stewart. She had found nothing but a couple of notes, one from a friend of Emmeline Fairfield, the other from a girl who had evidently been at school with her correspondent. And so the days went by very quickly for all the inmates of La Solitude, until one day, at luncheon, Beppo suddenly exclaimed regretfully that a great Paris financier with whom he was in touch was to be in Rome 4 or 5 days from now, and that it was important he should see this man. "I have sent off a telegram to find out exactly when he will be there," he said. "I do not mean to be very long away, mamma." The Countess saw a look of surprise, and not altogether one of pleased surprise, pass over Lily's face, and that look disturbed the older woman. Did Lilly regret the probable quick return of Beppo? The anxious mother began to wish ardently that something might be settled between the young people before Beppo left. Drawing her son aside after luncheon was finished, she said, a little nervously, "I hope you are not going too slow, my boy. You do not seem to me to be making very much way with our dear little friend." But he said, "Leave it to me, mamma. I will choose the right moment. Do not interfere." Even so, when she stood by the little gate on which were inscribed, in faint characters, La Solitude, and saw the two start off for what had now become their daily drive in the beautiful hilly country which lies behind Monaco, she had a sensation that something was going to happen, and she was filled with doubt, anxiety, and suspense. How terrible to think that the future of so great and ancient a family as the Polders should depend on the whim of a foolish girl of 21. The end of Chapter 25. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 26 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 26. "You are frightening me, Beppo. We have been out long enough. Let us go home." Lilly Fairfield was speaking in a very quiet, level voice, but her face looked white and strained. Beppo had stopped the motor beside a steep and lonely mountain gorge, and now he was pouring a torrent of violent, passionate words of love into her ear. As soon as his hand was free, he had grasped her left wrist, as in a vice, and now he was trying to force her to look round at him. But she went on staring before her, a look of endurance and growing fear on her pale face. "There is nothing to be frightened of, Lilly. Do you not understand that I love you? I love you as an Indian devotee worships his idol. You are in no danger from me. I should not have spoken to you today had you not seemed so gentle and so kind. I thought your cold heart might be melting a little, that you
might be feeling touched by my silent devotion, now that I am going away so soon. Surely I may speak. What is there between us? What is that menacing shadow that always rises up when I speak to you? God knows, with infinite reverence and respect, of my love for you."
He was speaking in broken, agitated, pleading tones, and yet there was an underlying touch of fierceness in his voice, which in very truth did terrify the girl. And the expression on his face had so changed that he seemed a savage stranger rather than a friend. She knew that they were miles and miles from the Solitude, for all she knew, miles and miles away from any human habitation, and she was sick with fear and distress. She felt as if she was dealing with a madman. She asked herself in a kind of agony if it would be right to temporize, to soothe him down, to tell him that perhaps in time she would become as he wished her to be. And then the image of Angus Stuart rose before her. No, she could not be, even for a few moments, false to their love.
"Only tell me that I may hope," he reiterated urgently, "and I will compel you to love me. Nay," as he saw her shrink back, "I will teach you most gently, most devotedly, to allow me to love you. That is all that I ask. It is not much, surely."
She turned round and faced him, but seeing his convulsed face and blazing eyes, her heart almost stopped beating with fright. She forced herself to say very quietly, "If you will let go my hand, Beppo, I will speak to you." He relaxed his strong, painful grip of her soft wrist.
"Forgive me," he exclaimed. "I fear I hurt you, but Lily, I am mad, mad for love of you."
And then he covered his face with his hands.
"Believe me when I say that I am grateful for your love."
Poor Lily! She stopped dead, for she did not know what more to say. She would have given years of her life to end this painful, to her this agonizing scene, and the still lonely beauty of the country round her seemed to mock her distress.
"God bless you for saying that," exclaimed Beppo fervently. "Lily, my sweet snow-like angel, do not be angry if I ask you to grant me one great, supreme favour."
Lily looked at him wonderingly. He spoke more like his old self, but he was gazing at her with supplicating eyes. What was he going to say now? He had already implored her to marry him, already implored her to try and love him, to allow him to love her, to give him time to prove his love for her. What was there left to ask for? A supreme favour? What a strange expression! He had been talking for, how long was it? She had lost count of time. 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour, half an hour. It had seemed an eternity to her, in so extravagant and wild a way that there seemed nothing left for him to say. "What is it?" she asked uncertainly. "I would do a great deal to please you, Beppo. If only... Her voice faltered. "If only you would be reasonable." He was looking at her now intently, almost as if he were trying to hypnotize her with those strange, brilliant blue eyes of his.
"The favour I ask,"
he said at last in a very low voice,
"I ask a Lily, as a man prays for a saint's intercession, on my knees. Do not be offended. Do not be what you in England called shocked. It is not a very great thing that I ask of you, yet to me it will be the greatest thing in the world. It is a thing which many a woman is quite willing to give a friend."
He stopped, and Lily, looking at him puzzled, asked hesitatingly,
"What is it, Beppo? You know I would do anything in reason to please you." "All I ask for," he said at last, "is the privilege."
"Yes," said Lily. "What privilege, Beppo?" He did not answer at once, and when at last he spoke, his voice had dropped almost to a whisper.
"The privilege of taking you in my arms and kissing you just once, Lily. That is all I ask. Is it not possible that at the contact of our lips your hesitation, your coldness will melt? May I not teach you what a man's love means to the woman he adores?"
As he ended his quick, rapt, low utterances of these, to Lily, extraordinary and unexpected words, he suddenly got up, pulled her to her feet, and threw his arms round her. And then, in the little motor, there began a terrible, wordless struggle between the two. Lily was determined, absolutely determined, that he should not kiss her. Rather than that, she would wrench herself free and leap into the gulf to the edge of which they were now so perilously near. Did Beppo Polder suddenly see into her terror-stricken mind? Or was it that at last he felt the horror and repugnance with which he inspired the girl whom he held closely pressed to him? Be that as it may, there swept over him, like a great tropical storm, a feeling of acute shame and self-loathing, as well as a determination that he would win her yet. He relaxed his hold, but as he did so a wild, blind rage rose up in his heart. Beppo Polder had never seen in a woman's face the look of physical repugnance he now saw in hers.
"You are not the pure angel that I thought you to be," he said hoarsely. "You are keeping your kisses for another man. Is that not so, Lily? If the answer is yes, then I will drive you and myself over a precipice. I have lived my life. I should not mind dying with you."
He was lashing himself up into more and more furious anger.
"What a simple-minded fool I was! You are not the first English girl I have known, Lily, but I put you on a pedestal. I did not think you were a flirt. Now I know you are, and you have succeeded in making me behave as I never thought to behave to a woman."
She sank down, back in the corner of the little car, white and trembling all over, but feeling that Beppo's madness had passed. But with what horror, what loathing, what fear she still regarded him.
"I offer you my humble apology for what has happened,"
he said in a bitter tone, and then he started the car. They drove along in dead silence for some time. Suddenly he slowed down and turned towards her.
"Lily,"
he exclaimed in a humble, deeply troubled tone,
"I implore you to forgive me. I behaved as I should never have thought myself capable of behaving to any human being, least of all to her whom I adore. Will you forgive me, Lily?"
And as she remained silent, for she was still in no state to speak, he went on.
"I'll do anything to atone. Impose the heaviest sentence, but do not look at me, Lily, as you are looking at me now."
She made a great effort over herself. "I do forgive you, Beppo," she said in a low voice, "but I don't want ever to think about what happened today again. Try and forget it too. I see," she tried to smile, "that my leaving England at all was a mistake. I don't understand foreigners and their ways. Perhaps I was to blame. Please don't tell Aunt Cosy anything about it." She looked at him pleadingly. "I am not going to stay at La Solitude long," she went on. "I've been thinking for some days that after you were gone I would make an arrangement with the convalescent home. They'll be glad for me to stay there for a while." He felt utterly dismayed.
"Do not punish my poor father and mother for my evil deeds, Lily. That would not be like you. That would be most cruel and ungenerous. Most humbly do I beg your pardon. But, Lily, forgive me if I ask you. You do admit that I love you, do you not?"
There was a long pause, and then Lily said, "Yes, Beppo, I do believe you love me, though you show your love in what seems to me a very strange way." Her frankness took him completely by surprise, and somehow gave him hope.
"If I were to go away," he said suddenly, "and then come back after a long time, is there any hope that I might find you different?"
She shook her head, and then, for the first time, she burst into tears. Beppo stopped the car. He took her hand, very gently this time.
"Lily,"
he exclaimed,
I shall never, never forgive myself for what happened today. Some demon whispered in my ear that if you would allow me to kiss you, all would come right. It was a foolish and an arrogant thought. But I was going away, and Lily, you admit that you know I love you.
Yes, she said in a low tone. I do know that, but let us try to forget what happened today. We have been so happy, so comfortable together since you came to La Solitude.
Do you think you will ever feel happy and comfortable with me again?
He asked, and she said slowly, Yes, of course I shall, as soon as I can forget what happened just now. Let's get home, Beppo, and if you don't mind, do promise me never to speak to me of it again.
I do promise you,
he said solemnly, and then to Lily's secret astonishment, Beppo seemed suddenly to slip back into his old pleasant, easy way with her. It was almost as if what had happened on the edge of that great wooded gorge had been a dream, horrible, unnerving to look back on, but still only a dream. Even so, she felt she would never forget, not even if she lived another 50 years, that awful moment of wordless, passionate struggle in the little car. She shuddered as she remembered how she had told herself that could she only free herself from Beppo's strong arms, she would leap out into the void rather than endure the further contamination of his touch. When they were close to La Solitude, Beppo suddenly turned round.
Look here, he exclaimed. I think I'll go down to Monte Carlo this afternoon. A fellow I know asked me to meet him at the club this evening. Good Madame Sansot will give me a bed at the Utrecht Hotel.
He paused.
Perhaps your thoughts will be kinder tomorrow.
He said those words so humbly and sincerely that poor Lily felt troubled.
Won't your going away upset Aunt Cosy?
She asked timidly.
No, not a bit. I shall come up in the morning, but this is our last drive in this little car. Would that it had been a happier one for you. Tell them that I have gone down with the car, Lily, and that I may or may not come back to dinner.
They were now on the clearing below the house, and then, so strange is human nature, Lily, in spite of all that had happened, felt just a little sorry that Beppo was going to leave her to go up alone to deliver his message at La Solitude.
Won't you come up to the house? She said nervously. They'll think it so odd you're going away like this.
At once he said quickly and reassuringly,
Yes, of course I'll come up. I thought you would prefer that I should not do so.
She made no answer to that remark, and as they were walking up through the wood, he asked,
Lily, am I forgiven?
Yes, she said. You are forgiven, Beppo, and I really mean it, but never speak of it again. Perhaps I was foolish to be as upset as I was.
I was mad, he muttered, absolutely mad. When I am like that, I lose possession of my senses. I forget what I do. Did I say anything very terrible to you?
She tried to smile. I can't remember, she replied evasively. Don't let's think about it any more, Beppo. Please, please. And so it was an apparently friendly couple who came up to the house. But the Countess had almost second sight where her son was concerned. She saw at once that there had been some kind of trouble. Still she pretended to see nothing, and accepted Beppo's news as to his forthcoming evening at the club, and his night in Monte Carlo, with apparent equanimity. He kissed his mother and shook hands warmly with Lily.
I shall be up tomorrow morning, he said. Not very early, but in time for lunch.
Lily went up to her room. She washed her face and she scrubbed her hands, and then she did what she could not remember ever having done before. She locked her door and lay down on her bed. She lived through every moment of that awful time. If only it had not happened, it had spoilt her pleasant relations with Beppo, she felt, for ever. Also, it would and must remain a secret as regarded herself and Angus Stuart. She could never, never tell him of what had happened today. She looked at her wrist. It was still swollen, but Beppo had not known that he was hurting her. At one moment of their struggle the pressure of his arms had been so strong that she had thought he would suffocate her, that she would faint, and she had been quite determined not to faint. She remembered with what a sensation of physical repulsion she had struggled. Even after he had released her so suddenly, the feeling had persisted for some time, and now that feeling had become transferred, in a queer kind of way, to Aunt Cosy. When Aunt Cosy had come near her just now, she had felt as if she must scream. Her nerves were thoroughly upset. A few minutes before she knew supper would be ready, Lily got up and changed her dress, and then she cast a longing look at the now growing packet of Angus Stuart's letters. How right he had been when he had said that he wished she would leave La Solitude. She made up her mind that tomorrow morning she would slip off to the convalescent home and ask if they could put her up for a few days. When there, she would be able to see Angus and arrange never to go back to La Solitude again. Though Lily tried to behave exactly as usual during the evening that followed, the Countess was well aware that something was wrong. She kept looking at the girl with a kind of furtive, anxious scrutiny. "Did you have a pleasant drive?" asked Uncle Angelo, and Lily was able to answer with some appearance of naturalness. "Yes, for we went a new way, and came to a most wonderful gorge. I thought it one of the loveliest spots I had ever seen." And then she stopped, suddenly overcome by the recollection of what had happened there. "You do not look well, Lily," said the Countess anxiously. "You look very tired, my dear. Would you like to go up to bed at once after dinner?" Lily gratefully accepted. She hoped that very soon La Solitude would have become a memory of a strangely mingled pain and pleasure, of regret and happiness. But now pain, regret, and yes, a hidden fear predominated, and she longed with a kind of desperate longing to escape now, at once, in the darkness down to the Hôtel de Paris, to kind, sensible Papa Popo, and to the man who loved her, and whom she loved. For one wild moment she actually thought of doing so, and then she felt ashamed. After all, both Aunt Cosy and Uncle Angelo had been very kind to her, according to their lights, and she knew only too well how hurt and angry Aunt Cosy would be when she learnt that Lily had no intention of staying on at La Solitude all the winter. The end of Chapter 26. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 27 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 27. "I insist on knowing what is the matter, Beppo." The Countess Polder gazed apprehensively at her son. Not even when he had been going through acute money trouble had he looked as moody and miserable as he looked now. He had just arrived at La Solitude to hear that Lily had gone off to the convalescent home for the morning. "I do not know that very much is the matter," he answered deliberately. "But perhaps I ought to tell you that I fear you are going to have a big disappointment. As you are such a clever woman, as well as an unscrupulous woman," he laughed disagreeably, "very often what you desire to happen does happen. But as regards Lilly Fairfield, you are destined to meet with failure." The Countess felt a shock go through her. Instinctively she put her hand on her heart, but she answered him at once in a calm, good-humoured tone. "You are such a child, Beppo, and like most young men, you are vain and impatient. I never supposed that Lily would fall into your arms at once, as no doubt a great many pretty ladies have done ere now. Believe me, when you are married to her, you will be glad that she was not what you want to find her now, eager and ready to be made love to. Perhaps, without knowing it, you have startled her. English girls are sometimes very prudish, you know." The Countess was looking fixedly at her son, and she saw that she had guessed right. They had evidently had some kind of a scene yesterday. "I allowed you to behave à l'anglaise," she went on. "I mean taking those walks and drives together, because I thought I could trust to your good sense. But I fear I was wrong, Beppo." "I lose my head when I am with Lily," he exclaimed. "Her coldness excites me. I do not want to make a mystery about it, mamma. I see you have guessed that I was a fool." As he saw a look of keen dismay come over her face, he added lightly, "Nothing very much happened. But yes, it is true that while we were out yesterday, we had something of a quarrel. I told her that if she refused to let me kiss her, I would send the car over the edge of the precipice." He saw the colour recede from his mother's face. She suddenly looked like an old woman, old and desperately tired. He felt queerly touched. Come, mamma, don't be frightened. Years ago, when I was younger, I might have been so mad, but I am an older and a wiser man now." "Then you did not kiss her?" "No, mamma. I could have done so, as, of course, she was at my mercy. But, well—" He shrugged his shoulders. "I never have kissed an unwilling woman." "Her conduct is strange," said the Countess thoughtfully, "for she certainly seems to like you." The speaker still felt very shaky, but she was trying to pull herself together. "I wonder if it has ever occurred to you," said Beppo, "that there is already a man in Lily's life. I taunted her, for mamma, I quite lost my head. And now, looking back, I remember that she said nothing. She did not deny it, as a modest girl would have done." As the Countess remained silent, he went on. "In one of your letters you said that Lily had solemnly assured you she was not engaged, and that you believed this to be the truth. But, mamma, has it ever occurred to you that the curious silent young man, that Captain Stewart, who is staying down at the Hôtel de Paris, may be in love with her?" "If he were a Frenchman, I would call him out," added Beppo fiercely. "We would have a duel, and I would kill him." "The girl hardly knows him," she said slowly. "I cannot help suspecting that I have a rival. Yet till yesterday I would have sworn that she was as pure as the flower from which she takes her name." "You can still swear that," said the Countess firmly. She made up her mind to remain absolutely silent as to the little she knew about Angus Stewart and his friendship with Lilly Fairfield. After all, there was only that letter, that rather short, formal letter, enclosing those notes on the writer's life. Still, she had thought of that letter and of those notes very often, as she had watched the girl during the last few days, much as a big, wily cat watches an unsuspecting mouse. She was fairly sure that Lily had not sent any letter out of the house apart from the one she had written to her uncle. It was true that the girl went to meet the postman every morning, but in Monaco postmen are not allowed to take letters to the post, and the post-box was some way down the hill. The Countess was certain that Lily had not been down there alone during the last few days. Still, the thought that her carefully laid plans for her son's happiness and prosperity might go wrong because of a silly flirtation between Lilly Fairfield and a casual train acquaintance made the Countess Polder feel as if she would go mad with disappointment and rage. She began to hate the girl whom only the previous morning she had almost loved. "Beppo," she said, and her voice trembled. Do you truly love Lilly Fairfield? Yes, I love her, he said sombrely, and I have never wanted anything so much, mamma. It is quite true that her money, if indeed she is certain to have the fortune in which you so confidently believe, would transform my life from that of an adventurer to that of a successful and happy man. He was speaking very seriously now. But apart from that fortune, even with only the few thousand we know she possesses, I would accept her as a gift from heaven on my knees. And, if rather ashamed of the emotion he had shown, he added in a lighter tone, It is a time that I settle down. Livia Pescobaldi is always urging me to do so. She was disappointed that I did not marry that ugly American girl last winter. There was a pause, and then the Countess said solemnly, Has your mother ever failed you, Beppo? He was startled, and again he felt oddly moved. No, mamma. You've performed wonders, and I've often racked my brains to know how you did it. I promise you that Lilly Fairfield will, in time, be your wife. But do not be in too great a hurry, my son. Carry out your plan of going to Rome in 2 or 3 days, and stay away a little longer than you at first intended to do. Then come back, but not to La Solitude. Go to the Hotel Hidalgo. I am sick of the Hidalgo, he exclaimed. If I do what you wish, mamma, I shall ask Madame Sansot to put me up again at the Utrecht Hotel. Not the Utrecht Hotel, cried his mother hastily. Surely you have never stayed there. It is a very common, low kind of place. I slept there last night, said Beppo quickly, and perhaps because, thanks to you, I now have all that money, mamma. I have become a miser. I want to take care of this money, to make use of it. I do not want it to slip away in hotel bills. It will not slip away, said his mother quietly. And thanks to this money, there is no need for undue haste. I swear to you, Beppo, that if you are patient, you will win Lilly at last. Perhaps you are right, mamma. You are so often right. I will go back to where I started with Lilly. She told me not many days ago that I was almost her ideal of— What do you think, mamma? Tell me, cried the Countess eagerly. Of a brother. Only that. He laughed rather harshly. At any rate, she shall be my dear little sister till I go away the day after tomorrow. And do not give a jealous thought to that dull Scotsman, said his mother lightly. His French friend is going back to Paris very soon, and I have an idea that he will then go away too. Without being vain, you can tell yourself, Beppo, that you are very much more attractive than Captain Angus Stewart. He was surprised to hear her pronounce so easily the curious Scottish name. I am not really jealous of the man. She hardly knows him, I know that, he said in a satisfied tone. And his mother was glad indeed that she had not told him the little that she knew. You have made me feel quite happy again, mamma. I know that you are right, and that I was a fool to be so impatient. But it is hard to be forced to go slow, as the English say, when one adores a woman. Beppo put his arms round his mother and gave her an affectionate kiss. There is no one in the world like my mamma, he said contentedly. There was a moment's pause, then— Would you advise me to go to the convalescent home now? This morning, as I did the other day? No, said his mother without hesitation. I think that would be a mistake. By the way, there is something I can do to fill in the time till she returns, he exclaimed. The Utrecht Hotel. He did not see just a quiver of discomfort and anxiety cross his mother's face as he uttered the name. The Utrecht Hotel, he repeated, is in the most tremendous state of excitement. There was an eccentric old man staying there who disappeared mysteriously some days ago. Well, mamma, his body has been found. I had the most interesting talk about the whole thing with Bouton. You know, the Chief Commissioner of Police. He and that man Papot are much excited about the matter. For it appears that the old man was no gambler. He was a strange old fellow, and always carried an enormous sum of money about his person, some of it sewn up in his clothes. Well, though Madame Sansot swears she never told any one the fact, it evidently became known to some band of robbers. He was waylaid. "A sadly common story," observed the Countess. She was staring across the lawn towards the sea, and she spoke in an indifferent tone of voice, as if thinking of something else. Beppo felt rather put out. "The body was found very near here," he said impressively. "Near here," she repeated mechanically. "Yes, mamma, close to that place where there is a spring under the ground. But for the accident that the owner of the land there had to move some hurdles, the body might have lain undiscovered for months." "That is certainly curious," exclaimed his mother. She had turned away and was obviously about to go indoors. "Let me tell you the rest of the story," pleaded Beppo eagerly. "It is really very interesting, and full of curious, mysterious points." His mother turned and looked at him. "Tell me quickly, dear child, for I have things to do this morning." He went on eagerly. "Madame Sansot did tell the police of the old man's disappearance, but he was so exceedingly eccentric, and paid his bill from day to day, so the police made up their minds that he had slipped off to Nice. The shabby portmanteau which he left at the hotel, I was shown it this morning, was not worth more than 30 or 40 francs, and only had a change of linen in it, and an old pair of boots." "Pray do not talk of this painful affair before your father," said the Countess in a low voice, "and I need hardly warn you not to say anything about it before Lilly either." "I don't see why I should not tell Papa," said Beppo quickly. "I think it would interest him very much. There is nothing more exciting, Mamma, than a murder mystery. I confess that among the most interesting hours of my life were those spent by me at the Murray trial. You will remember that Olivia was determined to go to it, and that I escorted her on that occasion." "Yes, and I thought it horrible that a woman should wish to be in any way associated with such an affair," exclaimed the Countess. "It is one of the things about our dear Livia that I have always remembered with distaste and disapproval." The young man shrugged his shoulders. He was sorry he had mentioned the Marchesa Pescobaldi. "Your father is not well," went on the Countess, "and I should not like him to hear, even less to see, anything of a painful nature." "He is bound to hear of it," said Beppo positively. "The whole of the Condamine is ringing with the story. You see, it is not in any way mixed up with the casino, and therefore no great effort is being made to hush the matter up. However, I will do as you wish. I will say nothing about it. But you must permit me, ma'am, to be interested in the affair. In fact, with your permission, I shall go off now and investigate the spot where the body was found." He waved his hand and smiled at her, telling himself with a little pang of concern, for he was an affectionate if a selfish son, that his mother had grown very much older in the last 2 or 3 years. It was she who looked ill today, not his good, easy-going papa. And then, after he had disappeared round the edge of the terrace, the Countess walked a little gropingly, as might have walked a blind woman, through into the drawing-room. There was no one there, and she gave an involuntary sigh of relief. She had a disagreeable communication to make to her husband and to Christina, and she was glad that she would not have to make it at once. She was going to propose something that she knew would annoy and frighten both of her housemates, and yet it was something which, though disagreeable, had to be done, for the matter concerned Beppo, and would take a danger and an obstacle out of her son's way, make the future for Beppo smooth. Surely Angelo would understand and not involve her in a long, tiring argument. Still, she would begin with Christina. She left the drawing-room and went slowly to the tiny kitchen. Christina was sitting at the small table, doing nothing. She looked up with unsmiling eyes at one whom she regarded as an intruder on her domain, and on meeting that look the Countess felt a pang of exasperation and pain. It was not her fault that Christina's help was required. Often in the past she had felt that she would have given anything in the world if she could have carried through her schemes unaided. But there are things which no woman, however clever, however determined, however physically strong, can do alone. And the thing which the Countess had made up her mind must be done within the next few days was one of those things in which the cooperation of at least 2 other human beings was required. 5 minutes after the Countess had entered the kitchen, she left it, wiping a few drops from her forehead as she did so. She was not a nervous woman, but the 5 minutes had tried her nerves severely, for Christina, to her horror and surprise, had begun by refusing to accede to her wishes.
"I would rather kill myself," the old woman had said. "And what is more, I will kill myself if you drive me too far. Whether I go to hell in the next few days or in the next few years does not matter much to me. For the matter of that, I am in hell already."
And then, after the Countess had answered these wild, extravagant and foolish words very quietly, making an appeal to Christina's better feelings and to her love for Beppo, the other had bowed down her head over the table and, sobbing bitterly, had confessed herself conquered. Yes, for one more time she would do what was required of her, but it must be the last time, for she was at the end of her strength.
"And what do you think I feel?"
the Countess had asked passionately, and then she had gone into her own sitting-room and sat down. Opening a drawer, she took out of it a box of little heart-pills, which had been given her 6 years ago by the specialist at Marseilles, whom she had gone to consult about the state of her health. She took 2 of these, and waited for their effect to begin, and then, as she gradually began to feel calmer, she got up, and, opening the door, went upstairs to find the Count. It had been her suggestion that the patient's table should be taken up there, so as to leave the drawing-room free for Beppo and Lilly to talk together in the odd English fashion. Beppo would have been extremely surprised had he heard the words she uttered as she entered the room where her husband sat playing patience. Those words were,
"The body of Vissering has been found, Angelo, and we must be prepared for some kind of interrogation. I do not feel we can absolutely trust Madame Sansot. She has been most sensible and most loyal up to now, but still one never knows."
Count Polder got up, a sure sign of agitation with him, and came towards her.
"It is no use to build a bridge for trouble,"
he said slowly.
"Unlike you, I am not afraid of Leonie Sansot. I think she will keep faith with us, the more so that it would only be a complication were she now to admit she had not told the truth at the first. Also, she knows so very little, only that the old brute dined here the night he disappeared."
His words consoled the Countess considerably. She suddenly made up her mind that she would not tell him yet of the perilous task which lay just in front of them. There would be time for that a little later on. By the time her son and Lilly came back to La Solitude, she was her own genial, rather garrulous self again. The end of Chapter 27. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 28 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 28. It was Beppo's last day, and what had happened 48 hours ago now seemed to Lilly Fairfield like a bad dream. Beppo was once more the kindly, good-natured, almost brotherly friend of his first week's stay at La Solitude, and though Lilly could see that Aunt Cosy was unlike herself, for she looked oddly disturbed, anxious, and gloomy, she had taken very well the news that Lilly had accepted an invitation to stay with the matron of the convalescent home for a few days. Poor Lilly! She felt ashamed of her duplicity, for she knew, deep in her heart, that she had no intention of coming back, at any rate for more than a day or two, to La Solitude. Beppo was taking the afternoon train to Italy, and it had been arranged that the carriage which brought the Count and Countess back from seeing their son off should take Lilly and her luggage to the convalescent home. While all these kindly arrangements were being made, and especially when she heard Christina say, "I shall miss you, mademoiselle. Do not stay too long away," she felt as if she must come back, just for a few days, but all that could be settled later on. Meanwhile, she was determined to do everything in her power to make the last hours of Beppo's stay at La Solitude pleasant. She wanted him to feel that she had really forgiven him that wild, strange, terrifying scene in the mountains, so when he asked her to take a last walk with him, she willingly assented. They had been out for nearly an hour, and were on their homeward way, when they stopped a moment on a path which seemed as if cut out of the mountainside. Below was a sloping carpet composed of the tops of olive trees, and Lilly felt a sensation of delight come over her as she looked at the wonderful panorama spread out before them. "While you are at the home," said Beppo suddenly, "do not do what I am told many of the English nurses did here during the war. That is, take a walk by yourself each afternoon. It is not safe to do so." "Surely you exaggerate the danger," said Lilly, smiling. "A mysterious murder was lately committed just below the spot where we stand," observed Beppo impressively. "I mentioned it to Mamma, who was much upset, and begged me to say nothing to Papa or Christina. So will you keep what I am going to tell you to yourself, Lilly?" "What dreadful thing!" exclaimed Lilly. She told herself that it really did look as if poor Mr. Ponting's friend had been right, and that there was a gang of bad characters, brigands as the Countess called them, who lay in wait for any passer-by who looked as if he had money in his possession. "The affair has specially impressed me," went on Beppo, "because the man was staying in the hotel where I stayed a couple of nights ago. It is an hotel kept by a person in whom we Polders have an interest, for she is the daughter of an old servant of my grandfather." Lilly was startled by Beppo's words. That must, of course, be the Utrecht Hotel, where that horrid Mr. Vissering was staying. "It is a commercial hotel in the Condamine," went on Beppo. "Nothing smart about it all, but a respectable place with a Dutch connection." His companion felt a sudden, unreasoning thrill of surprise and discomfort run through her. Standing there, in the sunshine, with that marvellous view spread out before her, it was as if she had been suddenly borne on a magic carpet to the sordid, dirty little smoking-room where she had met that sinister old Dutchman. Beppo, absorbed in himself and in the story he was telling, did not notice the look of apprehension which flitted across her face. "Listen to what I am going to tell you," he said earnestly. "It will prove to you that my warning as to your lonely walks is by no means foolish or exaggerated." He waited a moment, and then went on. "About a month ago there arrived at the Utrecht Hotel a rich Dutchman. He had made a lot of money out of the war, and he had come to Monte Carlo to see a little life. After a while, the woman who keeps the hotel, her name is Sansot, discovered that the old fellow had with him a great deal, in fact an enormous lot, of money. He kept most of it on his person, sewn into his clothes and in deep pockets he had specially made for the purpose. He was a queer individual, and he did not care for gambling. In fact, he very seldom went into the rooms at all. "Did you know this old man?" asked Lily in a low voice. Beppo shook his head. "I? Of course not. But when I went down to the Utrecht Hotel the other evening, I found the place in a great commotion." "Why that?" asked Lily. Her voice had sunk almost to a whisper. "Has anything happened to—" She nearly said Mr. Vissering, but stopped herself in time. Her heart was beating. She felt filled with a kind of strange shrinking apprehension. Why had Aunt Cosy and Uncle Angelo told her that lie, as to Mr. Vissering being a business friend of Beppo's? She longed, and yet she feared, to hear what Beppo had still to say. "Let me tell my story in order," went on Beppo importantly. "About 10 days ago, or so, the old Dutchman disappeared. He had gone out to dinner somewhere, and he told Madame Sansot that he would be sure to be back early. But he never returned. Luckily for herself, the woman informed the police the next day. She was nervous, owing to her knowledge that the man had so much money on him, though she declares that she never told anybody of the fact. Well, Lily, to cut the long story short, this Dutchman's body was found down there." He pointed vaguely to a spot among the treetops just below where they were standing. "His body was found?" repeated Lily mechanically. "It is probable that he had a supper in one of the villas which are scattered about on the mountainside, but what happened there is still a complete mystery. Perhaps his murderers followed him from the villa, where he had dined, and brutally did him to death in a lonely spot. Or, if your friend Popo is right, he was murdered in the villa, and his body conveyed to where it was found after his death." How terrible," whispered Lily. She felt as if everything was going round her, as if she was about to faint. Her hand clutched convulsively the iron railing in front of her. "The body was found under a heap of hurdles," went on Beppo, "and it was only owing to the fact that the peasant to whom these hurdles belonged had sold them to a neighbour that the corpse did not lie there undiscovered till next spring. Though the body was almost naked, the clothes were neatly arranged under it. They had been ripped open and all the money taken away." As Lily made no comment, he added, "You can imagine the sensation the affair has made in the hotel. While I was there, one talked of nothing else. I myself went along to see the Commissioner of Police, a very decent fellow named Bouton, and he told me that there are points about the story which may make it a cause célèbre." "What are those points?" muttered Lily. "One curious point is that the man appears to have been drugged. If true, that is a very curious fact, for it disposes of the idea that he was set upon and killed by a gang of men who had never seen him before. The object of Bouton and of the detectives he has put on the case is to discover where the old fellow spent his last evening. That is still shrouded in absolute mystery. Madame Sansot declares that she does not know. The Commissioner is sure she is telling the truth, but Popo, who, as of course you know, Lily, is a distinguished French secret agent, is convinced that the woman does know, and will not tell. He is even inclined to believe that she knows more of the murder than she is willing to admit, but that neither I nor Mamma think likely. Altogether it is a very exciting affair." Lily could not speak. Her mind was in a whirl of miserable suspicion and questioning fear. "Perhaps you do not realize," went on Beppo, "that the spot where the hideous discovery was made is only about 200 yards from La Solitude." "Surely we're much farther off than that here." exclaimed Lily. "Yes, walking homeward as we are now walking, we are at least a mile from the Solitude. But do you remember, during our first drive, how we went by a short cut through the olive woods?" "Yes," remembered Lily. "I remember that." "The Dutchman's body was found," said Beppo impressively, "just above the kind of yellow morass into which, as you may remember, our motor car sank." Lily gave a long, convulsive gasp. She saw, as if it was indeed there, in the air before her, the trolley pushed up against the inner wall of the outhouse, with its big bicycle wheels stained with yellow mud. And then, all at once, her companion saw that she was extraordinarily disturbed. He felt both astonished and alarmed. The girl looked on the point of fainting. "Forgive me for telling you this horrible story," he exclaimed. "I had no idea it would frighten you so. And yet, Lily, I shall not be sorry that I told you, if it means that you will be careful." "I will be very careful," she whispered. And then they both turned and walked slowly on, but so frightened, so shaken was she by the story she had just heard, that at last she had to take Beppo's arm and cling to it. And always Lily will remember how very kind and considerate Beppo was to her during the half-hour that followed. The young man was puzzled and distressed. Somehow he had not realized that Lily was so sensitive. But he knew that there are people to whom the thought of any crime of violence is extraordinarily painful and disturbing. It was clear that this English girl, whom in his way he so truly loved, was one of them. And then, suddenly, Lily took a desperate resolution. She felt she could not go back to La Solitude filled with such a hideous, agonizing suspicion. "Beppo," she said pleadingly, "I want you to do me a great kindness. I want you to go on with me now to the convalescent home, and to arrange for my things to be sent on to me there this afternoon." She saw a look of surprise and discomfiture come over his face, and she went on hastily. "I feel so ill. I know I'm foolish, but I can't help it, Beppo. That story you told me has made me feel sick and faint. If I were to go back with you now, Aunt Cosy would feel worried and would ask me a lot of questions." He was impressed by the agitated way she spoke and by her curious pallor. "I will do as you wish, Lily," he said in a soothing tone. "I am never at a loss for a good lie. I will say that we met one of the nurses, and that she forced you to go back with her to see a girlfriend just come out from England." "That will be good of you," she murmured gratefully. She added, "Perhaps Christina will put the few things I have out in my room in my trunk. It was arranged that the carriage which brings your father and mother back from the station should come on to the home." "Yes, that will be quite all right," said Beppo cheerfully. "But, Lily, only one thing troubles me. Are you fit for that further big walk?" "Yes, I am quite fit for it," said Lily. She straightened herself, already feeling better and calmer, and, as she walked slowly on, she told herself how amazed she would have been 2 days ago had an angel descended from heaven and told her that a time would soon, very soon, come when her heart would be filled not only with affectionate gratitude, but also with the deepest pity towards Beppo Polder. Then she strove to fix her mind on the real foundation for her wild, disordered thoughts and horrible suspicions. She longed to be alone, free to think things over, but still, deep in her heart, she felt she knew now that the Count and Countess Polder were cold-blooded murderers. It was impossible for Beppo Polder to remain silent for any length of time, and during that last half-hour they spent together he talked a great deal, trying to tell Lily things that he thought would interest her about his English friends in Rome. And she answered him with a word now and again, her heart wrung with pain for the man by her side, as there crowded on her memory many of the little scenes of the last 10 days. Aunt Cosy's pride and delight in her handsome, good-humoured, attractive son, Beppo's pretty, caressing ways to his mother and to Christina. Lily remembered the old woman's strange and awful self-accusations. Christina surely was a good woman. "Beppo," she said suddenly, "I wish you would tell me something about Christina." "About the Christina?" To her surprise he looked disturbed and uncomfortable. "What is it you want to know, Lily? What sort of people did she come from originally? She is so unlike what I should have supposed servants of her class in Italy or France to be." "You have asked me a question, and I will answer it truly, Lily." He spoke very seriously. "Christina is not what she seems." Lily turned and looked at him. She felt surprised, even startled. For a moment she forgot the terrible thoughts which had been filling her mind. What took their place was an overwhelming curiosity. "Christina," said Beppo deliberately, "is not the servant. She is my father's sister, not, as mamma probably told you, his foster sister." As an exclamation of astonishment escaped Lily, he went on, "That the woman is an angel. She adores my father, she adores me. When many years ago Papa lost his fortune, and my parents were in very truth terribly poor, my Aunt Christina offered to come and live with them, literally as their servant. Time went on, and we became gradually less pinched. To do Mamma justice, she then desired that Christina should take her proper place in the family. But Christina refused. She preferred what she calls her independence. It is no secret to you, I feel sure, that she does not like my mother. Would that she did. But there it is. They are too utterly different to like one another." Lily was amazed by what she had heard. Amazed, and then, quickly, there was added a feeling of trouble and dismay to her amazement. "I suppose," said Beppo slowly, "that you are very much surprised, Lily." She drew a long breath. "Yes," she said dully, "I am very much surprised. And yet, in a sense, Beppo, I am not surprised at all." The truth escaped her in spite of herself. Whatever there was to know, Christina surely knew. "I have told you this, Lily," said Beppo impressively, "because to you I will not lie. The only person now living who knows the truth is the Marchesa Pescoboldi. Her family and mine were friends through generations, so she has always known the strange story of Aunt Christina." As he spoke, there came back to Lily the curious, ambiguous words the Marchesa had used as to Christina being a noblewoman and doing what she did for the sake of Beppo. Had she done a great deal else, which neither Beppo nor anybody else in the world but she, Lily, suspected, also for the sake of Beppo? They were now close to the entrance of the home, though still out in the open road. "Beppo," said Lily very gently, "I should like to say good-bye to you here." "Certainly, if you wish it," he said. Then he added, "Forgive me for saying I hope you will not go in and begin work at once. You do not know how ill and tired you look, Lily. I shall never forgive myself for having told you that horrible tale." "I know you meant it in all kindness," she said. And then all at once she added something which astonished the young man. "For I've changed my mind," she said tremulously. "I'd rather you came with me through the grounds to the front door. I feel so frightened, Beppo." "But of course," he said quickly. "I am enchanted to be in your company a little longer." They walked up through some beautiful flowering shrubs till they stood at the door of the house. A few moments later it was opened by the matron. She uttered an exclamation of surprise.
"I thought you wouldn't mind my coming rather earlier than I said," said Lily. "My luggage will be sent on this afternoon." She turned round and held out her hand to Beppo Polder. He took it in his. "Good-bye," he said. "Good-bye, Lily, or rather, I should say, au revoir." "Good-bye," she repeated, and then she lifted up her face and, with a surprise which his good breeding enabled him to completely conceal, he realized that she expected him to bend down and kiss her in front of the Englishwoman who stood by, looking at them curiously. He did kiss her. He kissed her as an affectionate brother would have done. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered. He felt very much moved and touched. She was an angel after all, but deep in his heart he realized something else, that this was to be their final parting, that she did not intend that they should meet again. He turned away, and Lily walked through into the hall. "Is anything the matter?" asked the matron uneasily. "You look very ill, Miss Fairfield. You look—" She took hold of the girl's hand and brought her gently forward to a window. "You look, my dear, as if you'd had a shock. Has anything happened?" "I have had a shock," said Lily dully, "but I can't tell you what gave it me. It isn't my secret. It's because I feel so queer and ill that I came here earlier than I meant to. You did quite right, and now you had better go straight to bed. I'll send you up a little lunch on a tray." And then Lily began to cry very quietly. These kindly, commonplace words reminded her of Aunt Emmeline and her old, untroubled life in England, which now seemed so infinitely far away. There are hours in life when everything but one central concrete point of fear, suspense, or pain disappears into nothingness. As a rule, this state of mind lasts but a little while. If it goes on too long, it kills the human being experiencing it, or breaks down the frail barriers between sanity and insanity. As she lay in bed all through the afternoon which followed her walk with Beppo Polder, Lily Fairfield felt as if she were going mad. She asked herself, indeed, if the awful thoughts and suspicions which crowded her brain were not, in very truth, a proof that her brain had given way and caused her to become suddenly insane. Horrible images haunted her mind. She thought of Solitude, that sinister, lonely house, as being full of the ghosts of those who there had met with a hideous death. Deep in her heart she knew that the Countess Polder had used her as a cat's paw, and once she heard herself say, quite out loud, "Aunt Cosy killed George Ponting, and she killed Mr. Bissering, and each time I helped." Her thoughts took another turn. What ought she to do? Was it her duty to betray Beppo's father and mother? Nothing could bring George Ponting or the old Dutchman back to life. On the other hand, how prevent the Count and Countess having new victims? There floated hazily through her mind a memory of having been told a strange and frightening story of how a woman who was suspected of having committed 2 murders was stopped, when, on the eve of a 3rd crime, by receiving an anonymous letter, warning her that if she ever committed a 3rd murder, she would be arrested. Could she, Lily, do something of the kind with regard to Aunt Cosy? At last, most mercifully, everything about her became shadowy, indistinct, and she fell asleep. "Would you like to come down to supper, Miss Fairfield?" She turned on the electric light. A bright, good light, very unlike the guttering candles of Solitude. She sat up and looked about her. On a table lay her hat, and with the sight of her hat she suddenly remembered, she could not have told you why, Monsieur Popeau. These people were very kind, but Papa Popeau was her friend, her dear, kind, clever friend.
He was leaving Monte Carlo tonight, but late, quite late. She knew that. Why not go to him now and put her suspicions, her almost certainties, before him? Before doing so, she would make him promise to forget that he had anything to do with the police. She would tell him that if he could not make her that promise, then she could not ask him for advice. But she felt sure he would understand. As for Angus, she did not want to bring him into this terrible business at all. There would be plenty of time to tell him everything afterwards. Everything? No, not everything. She would never let him know that poor George Ponting had stayed on that night simply because it was a pleasure to him to meet an English girl. And never would she let anyone know either about that horrible old man, Mr. Vissering. She knew, she had always known, that he had come up to La Solitude on that fateful night because he wanted to see her again, and for no other reason. She went downstairs, and then it was as if things were being made easy for her. The matron, on hearing that she wanted to get into Monte Carlo, told her that the motor was going in there to meet a train. But did she feel really well enough for the little expedition? And Lily said yes, she was all right now, and that it was on really important business that she wanted to see a friend at the Hôtel de Paris. The end of Chapter 28. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 29 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 29. Hercule Poirot and Captain Stewart were walking up and down in front of the Hôtel de Paris. Stewart held a letter in his hand. It had been left for him late that afternoon, but it had only just been given to him. He held the letter out to the other man, and Monsieur Poirot read it slowly and carefully. It was written on the Hôtel de Paris paper. Dear Captain Stewart, I had hoped to find you in, and so convey my invitation in person. We hope that you will come and share our simple meal tonight at La Solitude. Miss Fairfield is not at all well, but she tells me that she will be able to come down this evening. I do not include Monsieur Poirot in my invitation, as I understand he leaves Monte Carlo today. Yours sincerely, Cosima Polda. That's very decent of the Countess to ask me. I don't see why I shouldn't accept the invitation, he said hesitatingly. You don't mind my leaving you, old chap? I wish I could divine why the Countess Polda has asked you to dinner tonight, Stewart. Monsieur Poirot uttered these commonplace words in a hesitating, anxious tone. Perhaps Miss Fairfield suggested it, said Stewart a little awkwardly. She may have done so. Then came a long pause between the two quaintly contrasted friends. There was a soft spot in Hercule Poirot's heart. Some 35 years before, he also had had his innocent, beautiful romance. He had been engaged to a girl he loved, and just before their marriage she had developed consumption. His most precious possession was a bundle of her simple, formal, and yet how infinitely pathetic, little letters, each of them beginning Mon cher fiancé, and telling him of the everyday, dull, quiet life she was leading in the Mentone of the late 80s. He had never spoken of that piteous episode in his past life to any living being since his own mother's death. But now, all at once, he made up his mind that he would speak of it to his companion, to this young Scot, who, though he liked and trusted him, had never confided in him. Stewart, he said, I want to tell you something. You think me a cynical old fellow, but I too have loved. I too loved a beautiful, pure, sweet-natured girl. She died within a very few miles of where we are standing now. I did not feel after her death that I could build up my life again in the good, solid, sensible way which is the only right way for a man to do. That is why I am a bachelor. I know in my heart that you love Lilly Fairfield as I loved my little Amy, and that has much increased my affection for and interest in you. I will tell you frankly that I am somewhat uneasy. You trust Miss Fairfield entirely. I do not doubt that she is trustworthy, but still she has now been for many days given to the influence of that Italian lady-killer whom that sinister couple wish her to marry. Why has the Countess Polder asked you there tonight, especially if Miss Lilly is not well? Is it to make to you some disagreeable announcement? I fear so. I shall soon know, said Angus Stuart, for I mean to go. He was touched by the Frenchman's confidence, but too shy to say so. Well, exclaimed Monsieur Popeau, I will say no more. Accept the invitation, and the good luck attend you. I may be a suspicious old fool after all. Again there was silence between them, and then Monsieur Popeau observed, I wish I was staying on, for this Wissering affair interests me intensely. It is so strange that there should have been another mysterious disappearance, and the discovery of a second body so soon after that of poor Ponting. I had a very queer suspicion some time ago, but now I confess that I am at fault. What did you suspect? Asked Angus Stuart. He had been too absorbed in his own affairs to give much thought to the mystery which seemed to interest Hercule Popeau so deeply. It would not be fair to tell you what I suspected, but I will tell you this much. Yesterday, Bouton and I had a talk with the Count Beppo Polder about the affair. I had a half suspicion that he knew Mr. Wissering, but it became perfectly clear to me that he had never even heard the Dutchman's name. By the way, he will not be at La Solitude tonight, for he left Monte Carlo today. I am glad of that, said Stuart shortly. I do not care for the fellow. There are worse people than Beppo Polder in the world, said Monsieur Popeau mildly, and Angus Stuart felt rather disgusted. Why, it was Popeau who had first set him against the young Count. So long, he said quickly. I think I'll buzz along now. It isn't good-bye for long. And Hercule Popeau answered quietly, No, my friend, for I may still be here when you come back. They keep early hours at La Solitude. This conversation had taken place nearly 3 hours ago, and now Hercule Popeau was sitting in the hall of the Hôtel de Paris. He had had a delicious little dinner, and was smoking a good cigar. In about half an hour he would be starting for the station. He kept looking at the door, for he hoped that Angus Stuart would be back before he left the hotel. For the 10th time he asked himself why the Countess Polder had gone out of her way to do the young Scotsman a civility. It would have been more natural to ask him, Popeau, to dinner, for after all he had entertained the Count and Countess to luncheon at the golf club. They were curious people, but since he and Beppo Polder had had that talk about old Wissering, he had liked the young man better. And then, while these thoughts were flitting through his mind, he suddenly uttered an exclamation of astonishment and of dismay, for coming quickly towards him was Lilly Fairfield. Among the brilliant, gay-looking groups of men and women scattered about the hall, some going to, some coming from the club, she looked a strange, pathetic little figure. Was it the fact that she was dressed in mourning that made her look so unnaturally pale? And what could have happened at La Solitude? A thrill of sharp apprehension went through him.
Yes, it is I, Monsieur Popeau. I want to see you in private for a few minutes. I have something to tell you, to ask you to do for me. I want your advice."
She was looking round her nervously, like a hunted creature.
"If possible, I don't want Captain Stewart to know that I have come to see you tonight. Can we go somewhere just for a few minutes where he is not likely to see us?"
"But he is up to La Solitude, mademoiselle."
"At La Solitude? Oh, no, surely not."
There was surprise and terror in the tone in which the girl repeated the name of the lonely house.
"Let's come out of doors," she exclaimed. I hardly know what I am doing, Monsieur Popeau."
He followed her, full of unease and acute curiosity. What could have happened up at La Solitude to make Lilly Fairfield look as she was looking now? And where was Angus Stewart? "Surely you left Captain Stewart up at La Solitude?" he exclaimed, when they at last found themselves standing alone in the open air, gazing at one another in the half-darkness.
"I have not come from La Solitude, but even so, why should you think Captain Stewart is there, Monsieur Popeau?"
She asked the question in a voice she tried in vain to make natural and calm. "The Countess called here this afternoon and left a note asking him to come to dinner either tonight or tomorrow night. She said you were not well, but that you would be down for the meal."
"But she knew that I was at the convalescent home, and that I am not coming back to La Solitude till next week."
"That makes what she did appear very strange," said Monsieur Popeau slowly, and he began to feel very much alarmed and puzzled. There was a curious pause. He took the girl's hand. "What is it?" he asked. "You frighten me. Though I am a man of mystery, I hate mysteries."
"We must go up to La Solitude now, at once," she whispered,
and he felt that she was shaking all over.
"They are murderers, Monsieur Popeau. They killed Mr. Vissering, and I think they killed Mr. Ponting. They may be doing something to Angus now."
No, he is probably quite safe, but we will go and see now, this moment." He called out to a passing taxi on its way back to Nice. "We shall be there very soon," he said, and patted her hand. Somehow his matter-of-fact manner comforted and steadied her, as he said to the driver rapidly in French, "This is 100 francs job for you, my friend, and less than half an hour's drive." He helped Lilly to get into the cab, and then briefly ordered the driver to go to the Condamine. "You know the house of the Commissioner of Police?" The man nodded. He did not look at all surprised. Monte Carlo is a place of unexpected happenings, of great and small tragedies. Monsieur Popeau put his fat right arm round his companion's shoulder. Come, he said. "Do not be frightened, my dear child."
"Must you go to Monsieur Bouton?"
she exclaimed.
"Can't we go straight to La Solitude?"
"I am not going to tell Monsieur Bouton anything. I am simply going to ask him to lend me 2 good stout fellows in case we should require help." They arrived in the quiet, solitary street she remembered so vividly in a very few seconds. But after Monsieur Popeau had gone into the house, she waited, quivering with impatience, in the darkness for what seemed a long time. But at last he came back alone. "It's all right," he said briskly. He did not add that he had told Monsieur Bouton that he believed he was on a new track connected with the Vissering affair. "I've arranged for 2 intelligent, strong young fellows to follow us in 2 or 3 minutes in a police motor, but they won't come into the grounds of La Solitude unless I whistle for them. And now," he said, "would it trouble you very much if you were to tell me why you came to see me tonight, and also why you made that very serious allegation against the Count and Countess Paula?" And Lilly did tell him in a broken, confused way what she feared, nay, what by now she felt sure was the dread truth.
"Perhaps I'm being very foolish about Angus," she said in a low voice. "After all, he has no money, thank God."
"No, but he has you," said Monsieur Popeau very gravely. Have I not guessed right, my dear child?" As only answer, Lily pressed the hand which held hers in so protective and kind a grasp. Through both their minds there flashed simultaneously the same thought, that Angus Stuart was indeed a formidable obstacle to the Countess Polder's wishes. But how could she have found this out? She had hardly ever seen the two young people together. Besides, even he, Hercule Poirot, had not felt sure till just now, when the girl sitting by his side had squeezed his hand in answer to his question. The Frenchman began to feel far more uneasy than he allowed Lily to know. For one thing, it was so strange that Angus Stuart had not come back long ere now to the Hôtel de Paris. On the other hand, they might have just missed him. Another possibility was that Stuart might even now be on his way down to Monte Carlo. Once they got clear of the streets, Monsieur Poirot instructed the driver to look out for a gentleman. But as they rushed up the steep winding road it remained absolutely solitary, till at last they heard the police motor coming up behind them. "I suggest that we stop the taxi some way below the grounds. Our object is to take them by surprise. Remember, mademoiselle, that if our suspicions are justified, we shall have to deal with the desperate people." A few moments later they were creeping softly, swiftly, up through the orange grove. It was very dark, for the moon was now but a slender crescent, and their footsteps sounded unnaturally loud. Lily and Monsieur Poirot were leading, with the two police agents 3 or 4 yards behind them. All at once Monsieur Poirot stopped walking and listened intently. Yes, there was a curious sound coming from where they knew the house to be, but it was an outdoor sound, caused by something moving over to the right, where a clump of bushes hid the front door of La Solitude from that end of the terrace. It was as if a big broom were being lightly brushed along the ground, and now and again there came the rustling of branches. The Frenchman told himself that it was probably some animal which had padded in from the mountain-side. They all walked slowly on, still in the same order. It was very dark, very unlike the brilliant moonlit night when the strange old Dutchman had dined at La Solitude. Still, even so, as they emerged onto the edge of the wood, they could dimly see the lawn before them, and the long, low outline of the house. All at once there came over those watching there, in the shadow of the dense grove of low trees, a feeling that there was something moving processionally on the terrace. Taking Lily's hand, Monsieur Poirot walked forward on to the rough grass of the lawn. Yes, there could be no doubt about it now. A group of people, propelling something along, were moving noiselessly across the front of the house. The dim grey group, passing so slowly, silently by, reminded Monsieur Poirot, most incongruously, of a wonderful series of shadow pictures he had seen as a young man at a famous café in Montmartre, in which a vivid drama was enacted by silent, noiseless figures in action being thrown upon a screen. What did that sinister procession mean? He hesitated as to what he should do, whether to give the signal to the two men to rush up and throw their searchlights on that group who were now advancing across the terrace right in front of where he and Lily stood, breathlessly watching them, or to wait a little longer. And then, all at once, something small and white leapt off the terrace and came running across the grass, straight at the unseen watchers. Monsieur Poirot stopped and put out his hand. What on earth was this? Had the Polders a dog? But his hand sank into thick, soft fur. It was Mimi, the huge cat, pressing herself against Lily's black skirt, purring loudly the while, glad at having found a friend who perhaps would take some notice of her, unlike her other, more familiar friends who were too much absorbed in their strange business to notice her. And still Monsieur Poirot delayed to give the signal to the men who were behind him. For one thing, he was afraid of what he was about to discover, afraid as he had never been in his life before, for he had come to care for Angus Stewart. Slowly the moving shadows disappeared to the left. They were evidently now engaged in the broad path which led from the left of the house to the edge of the little property, with naught beyond but a wild bit of mountainside. The Frenchman, still holding Lilly by the hand, moved up after the sinister group, and then, all at once, he blew his whistle. At that signal, all four rushed forward at right angles across the lawn on to the end of the terrace. Monsieur Popeau uttered loudly the one word, "Maintenant!" and the two powerful torches were turned full on the strangest sight which even the famous secret agent had ever gazed upon. On a long, low trolley with high bicycle wheels lay Angus Stewart, looking as if asleep. Monsieur Popeau thought him dead. The trolley was being propelled by Count Polder, and at the foot of the trolley walked the Countess backwards. Christina stepped lightly, phantom-like, by the further side. For the space of what seemed a long time, though it was only for 3 or 4 seconds, the group remained brilliantly lighted up in stark and terrified immobility. Then 2 shots rang out. The Count had turned the weapon with which he had meant to kill Angus Stewart against himself. At once there followed a scene of awful confusion. The Countess began fighting as if for her life with one of the strong, agile men provided by Monsieur Bouton. His companion was bending over Count Polder, and Lilly, with trembling fingers, was following Monsieur Popeau's directions and trying to undo the insensible Angus Stewart's collar and shirt. But since he had exclaimed in a tone of infinite relief, "Be of good courage, he is not dead," she no longer troubled as to what was happening about her. And then, while all this was going on, Christina vanished like a wraith in the night. But no one saw her go, or indeed noticed that she had gone, till long afterwards, as length of time was counted on that strange and awful night.
"Do you think you could go into the house and find me a candle?"
muttered Monsieur Popeau.
"Oh yes, of course I can."
Lilly set off running towards the house.
"Not so fast,"
panted Monsieur Popeau close behind her.
"Stewart is only drugged," he exclaimed. "He will be quite himself by tomorrow morning, but we only came just in time. You saved his life."
Lilly stopped and looked at the closed shutters of La Solitude.
"I wonder how I can get in," she murmured. "Are you afraid to go into the house alone?" he asked. "No, no," she cried. "Not a bit afraid. Never afraid any more."
She ran along the terrace and so round to the back of the house. Yes, the gate which gave access to the yard was wide open. She opened the kitchen door. Christina's little oil lamp was burning, and she felt a vague sensation of surprise that everything looked just as usual. Taking up a candle and a box of matches, she rushed back again through the yard and round to the terrace. She found Monsieur Popeau alone by the trolley. After Lilly had lit the candle,
"Yes, it is as I thought. They could not make him drunk, but they gave him some form of strong narcotic, probably in water. We will take him down to the taxi, and so back to the hotel. He will be all right by the morning."
The man whom Lilly had last seen struggling with the Countess Polder came forward.
"I have got her tied up,"
he said apologetically.
"There was nothing else to do, monsieur." "You had better take her into the house and stay there with her till Monsieur Bouton sends up instructions." "We fear Count Polder is dying." "And where is the old servant?"
asked Monsieur Popeau suddenly. The man looked taken aback.
"She can't have got far," he exclaimed. "We'll soon find her, monsieur."
Beppo Polder sat in his bachelor rooms in Rome, finishing the frugal supper his excellent day-servant had left out for him. He had only arrived about an hour before, and he felt pleasantly tired after the long journey. He was in a very cheerful state of mind, for he had found awaiting him a cordial letter from the great financial authority he had come to meet, and also he had had time to forget the at once solemn and rather painful impression Lilly's farewell had made on him. Nay, more, he had half persuaded himself by now that that strange goodbye kiss had been a sign that she was softening towards him. His mother was not only a clever woman, she also had a shrewd knowledge of human nature. She was probably right in thinking that if he were only patient, he would win Lilly in the end. He was hesitating as to whether he should go to bed or saunter along to his club, when he heard a low knock at the door which opened on one of the landings of the huge old house where he had his rooms. Feeling rather surprised, for no one yet knew of his return, he went and opened the door, and then a thrill of irritation shot through him, for a slim, deeply veiled woman stood out there in the dim light cast by the staircase lantern. He knew only too well who his visitor was.
"This is really wrong and most imprudent, Livia," he said sharply. "I should not have told you the hour of my arrival had I known that you would do this mad thing."
She threw back her veil, and he was startled at the look of strain and anguish on her pale face.
"What is it?"
he exclaimed.
"Has anything happened to...
No, nothing has happened to my husband, and he knows, Beppo, that I am here."
"He knows that you are here?"
He was thoroughly startled and alarmed now. What was it she had come to say? He drew her gently through into his antechamber. Then he shut the door.
"Now tell me, Livia," he said, "what brings you here tonight?"
She answered in an almost inaudible voice.
"During the evening 4 different reporters came at different times to ask if we knew where you were."
"4 reporters?"
Beppo looked astounded.
"Then you have heard nothing. No one has been here."
"The notice telling of my absence is still on the door downstairs. But why am I sought for?"
he asked, bewildered. The Marchesa Pescobaldi was trembling violently now. It was as if she had the ague. He took her cold hand in his.
"Come, Olivia, calm yourself. I have done nothing, I swear it."
"Of course I know that you have done nothing,"
she whispered, and then she held out, with shaking fingers, a strip of thin paper. Beppo Polder did not know that it was what all the world over is familiar to newspaper men as flimsy. He took it in his hand, and turning away from her, held it up close under a lamp which hung from the high ceiling. On the piece of paper was written in pale characters and in a plain round hand, "A terrible affair at Monte Carlo." An amazing affair has just taken place at Monte Carlo. The Count and Countess Polder, highly respected residents and natives of the Principality, are both in prison since last night under the charge of having committed a series of singularly cold-blooded and infamous murders. The Count lies dangerously wounded by his own hand in the infirmary of the prison. The Countess has had a series of heart attacks, and it is thought probable that she will escape justice. A search is being instituted in the neighbourhood for their servant, who is believed to have been their accomplice. Their last victim, a rich Englishman staying at the Hôtel de Paris, was only saved by the fortunate accident that a friend, having business with him, hurried up to the Polders' villa late at night to find the miscreants on the point of killing him. His grave was already dug. The affair is of peculiar interest to Roman society, as Count Beppo Polder, the well-known sportsman, is the only son of the Count and Countess Polder. Count Beppo, who had been staying with his parents, left Monte Carlo yesterday. Every effort will be made to find him, as it is thought that he is an accomplice. The end of Chapter 29. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 30 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 30. 4 days had gone by, and Lilly was sitting out in the sunshine with Angus Stewart. The effect of the poisonous drug which had been administered to him the night he had dined at La Solitude had not passed off as quickly as Papa Popo had believed it would. Still, he was now by way of being well again, and for the first time Lilly felt she could ask him to tell her what had happened during the evening which was to end in so terrible and tragic a fashion. He waited a while before answering her, and then he said very quietly, "There is curiously little to tell, darling. The one outstanding thing I remember is how surprised and annoyed I was that you did not appear. The Countess Polder is a wonderful actress." Lilly shuddered. "She is indeed," she whispered. "I remember that when she came out to meet me, as I walked up to the terrace by the usual way across the lawn, she explained that you were not quite so well, and that she had persuaded you to remain in bed until after dinner. Looking back, I suppose she intended me to say, 'I hope Miss Fairfield won't come down at all.'" He waited for a moment, then went on. "But, Lilly, I was selfish, and I wanted desperately to see you. I had a queer kind of apprehensive feeling about you. Popo had said something which had made me feel vaguely anxious, and I didn't believe it would do you any harm to come down for a few minutes, so I simply answered that I was glad you would come down after dinner." "What happened then?" asked Lilly. "Nothing particular happened that I can recall. They were both very civil in a formal, affected way, and I was astonished at the splendid spread to which we ultimately sat down. Still, there was a certain amount of delay, and as I look back, I cannot help suspecting that their old servant—" He saw a curious expression pass over Lily's face, but he had no clue to what lay behind it, so after a moment he went on. "What was I saying? Oh, yes, I cannot help thinking that the old servant wanted to convey some kind of warning to me. Twice, when she was standing in the only place where neither the Count nor the Countess could see her face, she stared at me in the most peculiar fashion, as if trying to attract my attention, and then, after we had some hot soup, the rest of the meal was cold, she dropped a lovely but very small decanter onto the floor, and it broke into 3 or 4 pieces. It had in it some liquor the Count wanted me to taste, and I wondered today, for today is the first time I have really thought the whole thing over, whether that liquor was drugged. Though the Count and Countess took the breaking of the decanter very well, and really made no fuss about it, I could see that they were extremely angry with the poor old soul. In fact, the Countess told her that henceforth we would wait on ourselves, and that she need not come back into the room." Again he stopped speaking for a few moments, then he began again. "The Count went out of the dining-room for some more of this special liquor, and he brought back some of it already poured out in 2 rather big wine-glasses. I confess I thought it was quite delicious, and made, I should judge, of very old brandy."
"And what happened after you had finished dinner?"
asked Lilly in an almost inaudible voice. There had risen before her the scene Angus had described so simply, the unhappy Christina trying to save Angus, and of course failing utterly. "To tell you the truth, Lilly, I felt very tired and stupid. The Count had filled up my wine-glass rather often," he added, smiling. "That does not mean that I was drunk, but still I did feel rather queer."
"You mean after dinner?"
"Yes, and yet I was very much alive to the fact that you had not fulfilled your promise to come down, and twice the Countess went upstairs to hurry you. Each time she came back, she said you were just coming, and of course I believed her. And then, well, Lily, I suppose the drug they had managed to convey to me, either in the food or in the wine and liqueur, began to act. As I sat on in the drawing-room, I got desperately drowsy, but I cannot tell at what exact time I fell into the sort of sleep which was practically insensibility.
"I wonder they didn't kill you in the house," said Lily in a strained voice.
It was much safer to put a bullet into me by the side of the grave they had dug, and then tumble me in, he said in a matter-of-fact way. Papa is convinced that I was the first of their friends they had ever thought of burying. The others were all so arranged as to convey in each case the impression of suicide. Lilly Fairfield drew a long breath.
"You have told me everything I wanted to know," she said, "and we'll make up our minds, here and now, never to speak of it again."
I agree, he answered quietly. Papa knows all I have told you, and he didn't want me to go into it with you, but it would only have worried you to go on wondering what had happened. Reader, have you ever thought what it would be like to be in any way associated with a great criminal case, what the French call a cause célèbre? Lily felt herself the cynosure of 100 eyes wherever she moved or showed herself, yet very few of the people gazing so curiously at the pretty English girl knew how really closely associated she had been with the awful events which had taken place in the last few weeks at La Solitude. But the mere fact that she had stayed there as the guest of the Count and Countess Polder invested her with a morbid interest in their eyes. The principal public excitement was concentrated on Christina, and on that unhappy woman's mysterious disappearance. She was being searched for high and low, but it was as if the earth had swallowed her up. And now, today, Lily Fairfield was expecting Mr. Bowring, who had been at once telegraphed for by Hercule Poirot. Though everything had been done to save her pain and distress, she had had to submit to a long interrogation on the part of the 3 famous French lawyers, and Monsieur Poirot was now secretly absorbed in the task of devising a way by which his young friend could be spared the terrible ordeal of appearing as a witness at the Countess Polder's forthcoming trial. Count Polder was dying, and the hope of finding out where Christina had hidden herself was being gradually abandoned. All at once Monsieur Poirot ambled up to where the 2 young people were sitting.
"Would you like to walk down to the station and meet your English friend?"
he said persuasively to Lily. The girl got up obediently. She moved like an automaton.
"I will, if you think I had better do so,"
she said dully. The story Angus Stewart had just told her was becoming intolerably real to her. While walking down the broad road leading to the station, Lily suddenly startled Monsieur Poirot.
"There's something I must ask you," she said in a low tone. "I want to know about Beppo Polder. Does poor Beppo know?"
There was a sob in her throat.
"If he does, how strange it is that he isn't here. Or is he here, after all? Have they arrested him too? I seem to know nothing now of what is really happening."
The Frenchman hesitated for a moment. Then he said gently,
"You do not need to trouble yourself about Beppo Polder. By a strange and wonderful piece of good fortune for him, poor fellow, he killed himself accidentally in a shooting gallery the very night he arrived in Rome, before there was time for him to have learnt the awful truth."
Lily's lip quivered. The tears ran down her face, and yet, yes, she was glad.
"And Christina?" she ventured. "What do you think has really happened to her, Monsieur Poirot?" "I think I know what has happened to Christina," he said mysteriously.
Then he stopped walking and looked round. but there was no one near enough to hear what he had suddenly made up his mind to tell her. He knew that he could trust her.
"I am quite sure that the unhappy woman fled on that awful night down to the valley, and then up to old Monaco, to the convent of the White Sisters,"
he said in a low voice. Before Lily's inward vision there rose up the great forbidding-looking iron gates which gave access to the sunny courtyard beyond. She saw again the stately Mother Superior, heard her reprove poor Christina, kindly but firmly, for the wild way in which she had spoken of herself.
"The order was founded by one of Christina's own ancestresses," went on the Frenchman, "and there has always been a close connection between the convent and the Polders. It is possible, but I do not say it is likely, for after all women are women even when they wear the holy habit, that the nuns have not yet heard the story of what has happened at La Solitude, though all Monaco is ringing with it. But in any case, the nuns would never give Christina up to justice. The poor soul will spend her life henceforth in work and prayer, repenting of her part in her wicked sister-in-law's crimes, and praying for Beppo Polder's soul." "I cannot understand how Christina could ever have allowed herself to be used in that way," said Lily in a deeply troubled tone. "She was so very kind and gentle." "I have little doubt that at first she was but an unconscious accomplice, and that at last the Count and Countess had to take her into their confidence. You may now think of her as being happier than she has been for years and years, for her life must have been one long torture. Yes, during the last 2 days I have liked to think of poor Christina in that quiet old convent on the hill," he said meditatively. "There must be wonderful views of both sea and land from those of the nuns' cells which overlook the sea."
2 days ago?" said Lily suddenly.
"Then did something happen 2 days ago that made you feel sure that Christina had taken refuge there?"
Monsieur Popeau again looked round. He even came a little closer to his pretty companion.
"I took a walk up to old Monaco quite early in the morning 2 days ago," he said hesitatingly. "I walked past the gardens where I once left you alone with Captain Stewart, and then, when I was at the extreme end of the rock, I looked up, and on a little piece of wall, which I now know to have been the wall of the convent garden, I saw—"
He stopped, and Lily exclaimed breathlessly,
"You saw Christina peeping over?" "No, I did not see Christina peeping over, but I saw Mimi." "Mimi? The cat?" exclaimed Lily. "Yes, Mimi the cat, walking along the top of the wall, already beginning to look as if he felt at home there. In fact, I will confess to you, mademoiselle, that I tried a little experiment. I called out very quietly and tenderly, 'Mimi, Mimi, come hither, my friend,' and at once he jumped down and rubbed himself, purring loudly, against me." "What an extraordinary thing!" exclaimed Lily. "Without doubt, poor Christina caught up the cat and fled with him. And now, as I said before, you may think of the poor woman as being happier than she has been for many, many years. She was the hapless victim of her wicked sister-in-law."
As Lily gazed up into his face, 1,000 questions trembling on her lips, questions that yet she shrank from asking, he went on slowly.
"Bouton and I have been making certain calculations, and we are convinced that old Wissering was the Countess's 9th victim. But, of course, till the last few weeks, when circumstances proved too much for her, she was very prudent. She allowed, that is, plenty of time to elapse between each of her crimes." Towards the last, the complete immunity she had enjoyed made her feel that she need never fear to be suspected. Hers was the mastermind. We have some evidence that the Count and Christina were unwilling accomplices. On 2 occasions, men afterwards so foully done to death received anonymous letters which we know could only have come from La Solitude. The end of Chapter 30. Read by Andy Sames. Chapter 31 of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 31. Lily sat up in bed and rubbed her eyes. She had been dreaming of home, of Aunt Emmeline, and of kind Uncle Tom. And then, all at once, she remembered everything. This at once familiar and unfamiliar place was her bedroom in the convalescent home where she had been treated with such wonderful kindness during the last 10 days. Only 10 days since that awful night. It seemed to her a year. Sometimes she still felt as if it was all a dream, and yet. All at once she covered her face with her hands. Today, incredible though the fact still seemed, was to be her wedding day. It was Hercule Poirot who had worked the miracle, for it still seemed a miracle to the 2 most closely concerned. It was he who had persuaded the cautious English lawyer, Mr. Bowring, that if Lilly Fairfield were to be saved from the terrible ordeal of giving evidence against her pseudo-aunt, she must become, before the trial of Countess Polder, Angus Stuart's wife, the chattel of her husband, compelled, that is, to follow him where he ordered her to go. There had been a good deal of rather anxious discussion. For one thing, Angus Stuart had been unwilling to take advantage of the strange position in which Lily found herself. But once Mr. Bowring and Hercule Poirot had overcome his scruples, Lily had been profoundly moved to see how ecstatically happy her lover had become. Almost as happy, she now whispered, as she was herself. There came a sudden knocking at the bedroom door, and the matron, walking in, pulled up the blind. "Am I too early?" she asked solicitously. Lily shook her head, smiling. And now, with the sun streaming into the room for the very first time, the awful nightmare which had always been there in the background, even during the last few joyous days, seemed to fade away. Lily forgot the past and thought only of the future. How wonderful to know that she and Angus were going off alone this afternoon to Italy for their honeymoon. It seemed somehow too good to be true. "A large box has come for you from Paris. I wonder what can be in it," said the matron, smiling. "But I don't know anyone in Paris." But even as she said the words, one of the VADs with whom Lily had made friends during the last few days brought in a large box covered with that curious black shiny paper with which French people do up parcels. "I don't think it can be for me," exclaimed Lily doubtfully. "Oh yes, it is. It's been expressed by passenger train." "How very, very strange." She jumped out of bed and looked down eagerly at the mysterious box. It was addressed, Mademoiselle Fairfield. The VAD cut the stout cord and lifted the wooden lid. Layer after layer of tissue paper was taken out, and then finally a beautiful ermine coat emerged, together with a quaint little ermine toque, in which nestled a sprig of orange blossom and of myrtle. It was the matron who finally espied a visiting card, on which was written in tiny characters, "With the donor's sincere good wishes, Papa Poirot hopes that Mademoiselle Lily will honour him by wearing his wedding gift on her marriage day." Lily's eyes filled with tears. How very good this quaint, whimsical, elderly Frenchman had been to her. Looking back, as they often do look back to their strange wedding day, both Angus and Lily Stuart
always agree that in many ways it was Papa Popo, rather than the bridegroom, who had seemed the hero of the occasion. It was he who appeared the central figure of the quaint little group gathered together round the temporary altar, which had been set up that day in the hotel where the British chaplain, during that first winter after the war, officiated. As was but befitting, the Frenchman was best man to his Scots friend, and to everybody's amazement he had appeared garbed in ancient dress clothes, with, on his breast, the cross of the Légion d'honneur and the military cross. It was Papa Popo also who presided at the wedding feast, which took place just after the wedding in a private room at the Hôtel de Paris. It was he who put the bride looking radiantly happy and wearing her superb ermine coat over her old frock, for she felt as if she never wanted to see any of the lovely clothes she had bought with Aunt Cosy again, into the luxurious motor which somehow or other he had managed to procure for the happy pair at very short notice. In fact, so extraordinarily brilliant were Papa Popo's various improvisations, and so artful the way in which he had managed to persuade everybody to do exactly what he wanted done, that Mr. Bowring muttered to Angus Stewart, "I begin to see why France won the Battle of the Marne." But it was fortunate, perhaps, that Lily did not overhear the final words which Hercule Poirot exchanged with the English solicitor after the two had watched the motor car containing the now married lovers speeding towards Italy. "And now, dear sir, while you go back to the fogs of Albion, I will return to the more congenial task of seeing that the Countess Polder is well and truly guillotined." The end of chapter 31. The end of The Lonely House by Marie Belloc Lowndes. Read by Andy Sames.